The story begins with our protagonist, Takumi Iruma, who is summoned to another world and finds himself standing before the goddess Nolyn, but the first thing she does is sincerely apologize because this was all a huge mistake. She explains that when a summoning spell is activated, it randomly selects a bunch of losers from Earth to be a cicade. But Takumi's life was actually going pretty well, so he was meant to be excluded from the summoning. However, an error occurred causing him to be dragged here alone with all the others, and it's all because the Holy Sidonia Empire decided to recklessly activate the summoning spell. Since Takumi was never meant to be summoned, Nolyn brought him up here instead, while all the other summoned heroes went straight to Sidonia. Takumi asks her if she can just send him back to Earth, since he was summoned by mistake, but unfortunately, she can't do that. She was so pissed off at Sidonia for using the forbidden summoning spell that she immediately patched it out of this world's magic laws so no one can move between worlds anymore. And that means Takumi is stuck here permanently. The process also kind of killed him, so there's that too. Takumi starts freaking out upon realizing that he's a disembodied ghost, but only tells him he doesn't have to worry because she has a plan. She can't send him back to Earth, but she can give him a new body and have him become a citizen of this world instead. And as an apology, since this is partially her fault, she offers to grant him her blessing to make his life easier. Takumi doesn't really have much of a choice, so he agrees to be reborn into this world, and Nolyn is glad to hear that because it makes this a lot easier for her. She tells him to open his status screen to check out the new life he will have, and when Takumi does, he finds out that Nolyn is planning to give him a 17-year-old body even though he's 40. Nolyn tells him not to bother with the minor details and more importantly, he still needs to pick out his job. She tells him that there are two main classes for jobs, so if Takumi wants something more combat focused, he can pick things like swordsman, knight or hunter. But if that doesn't appeal to him, then he could always pick one of the production jobs instead. Takumi doesn't like the idea of having to fight, so he decides to go with a production job after all. Nolyn then proceeds to implant the job in his soul, along with a bunch of other bonus blessings, and sends him on his way, completely forgetting to give him a tutorial. Takumi crash lands in the middle of a forest, and after finally picking himself off the ground, he sees his reflection in the river and realizes that he really has become a different person and he doesn't have arthritis anymore. He decides to make the best of his new life and goes to look in the bag Nolyn dropped off with him to see what's inside. In the bag he finds some food rations and some money, so it looks like he doesn't have to worry about starving for now. He then takes a look at his status screen and it looks like Nolyn really hooked him up with all the useful skills he could ever need. He even has elemental magic, so he decides to try that out first to see if he can really use it. He opens his hand and calls out water ball, and just like that, a water ball forms in his hand. The other elements work the same way, so Takumi is easily able to use them on his first try, but now he has figured out how his magic works. He has to start thinking about his next move and decides to head for the nearest village. While walking, Takumi comes across a stick in the middle of the path and it looks like a really nice stick, so he uses his appraisal skill to scan it and finds out that this is Trent wood. It's gotten from the trade monster and it is really useful for making things like magic staves and spears. So Takumi decides to put his modeling skill to the test and uses it on the wood to create a spear. Since the wood works so well, Takumi decides to scan around to see if there are any other useful plants nearby and he finds a ton of them, so he spends the next hour picking them. But now he doesn't know what to do with all these. They definitely won't fit in his bag, so he might have to leave them behind. But then Takumi remembers that he has an item box skill, so he uses it to store all the plants. Just then, he hears someone scream and a few moments later he sees a little girl run out of the bushes. The little girl comes to him for help because there's a monster chasing after her, and when Takumi turns to see what kind of monster it is, he finds a massive horned rabbit. The rabbit charges at him and merely impales Takumi, but at the last second he freaks out and accidentally stabs the rabbit in the head, killing it instantly. He is shocked that a beginner like him was able to win against a monster like that, so he assumes it must be because of Nolyn's blessing. But Nolyn had nothing to do with it. It was just dumb luck. As a result of his fight, Takumi earns the job title of warrior, but he's not happy about it since he was hoping to avoid fighting altogether. But that's not really important right now since he still has to check if the little girl is alright. Molly says she's fine and explains that she was out here picking herbs, but she accidentally got too far from the board village and ended up getting attacked. Upon hearing her mention a village, Takumi gets excited and asks her if it's alright for him to come to the village. Molly tells him she'll show the way, but before that, she asks if he's planning on taking that rabbit with him since their meat is really tasty. Takumi realizes it would be a waste to leave it here, so he stores the rabbit in his item box, but immediately after doing so, he realizes that he just did that in front of Molly, even though he was planning to keep his item box skill a secret. Well, there's nothing he can do about it now, so he and Molly start walking over to the village. And at the same time, the other people who got summoned have just arrived in the Empire of Sidonia, and they are incredibly confused about what's going on. None of them are hurt, but they have no idea where they are, and all of a sudden they hear someone call out to them as heroes. A woman approaches and tells them that they are no longer in their original world, and that they have been summoned to use their power as heroes to save this world. She introduces herself to them as the Empress of the Sidonia Empire, Elizabeth, and one look at her face makes the kids realize that she's shady as hell. Just then, Akane's unique skill kicks in, and it seems Nolyn granted her the blessing of revelation, so if she follows her gut instinct, she will naturally arrive at the right answer. And right now, Akane's gut is telling her that Elizabeth is a backstabbing bitch, so she can't be trusted. Meanwhile, Takumi has arrived in the board village, and Molly's parents come out to thank him for saving their daughter. Molly's dad introduces himself as Bunga, and his wife over here is Martha. They think Takumi is a really responsible guy to have traveled so far on his own. And on that note, Takumi asks them if it would be alright for him to stay in this village for a while since he has nowhere else to go. They tell them he is welcome to stay, but unfortunately they don't have an inn in the village, so there's nowhere for him to stay right now. But they could always just build him a house though. All the villagers gather around an empty plot of land and are about to begin work, but Takumi wants to make himself at least somewhat useful, so he uses his earth magic to flatten the ground for the foundation. This is the first time he has used magic on such a wide scale, so he almost passes out from mana depletion. The villagers are all amazed that Takumi can use earth magic so easily, so Takumi asks if they think he just did something strange, but they tell him not to worry about it. Since he has taken care of the foundation, the rest of them get to work assembling his house for him. And by the next morning, Takumi's house has been completed. Thanks to his carpentry, blacksmithing, and sewing skills, Takumi was able to make a good set of furniture for himself. But there's something else he's been meaning to try out. He got a bunch of ores from the village blacksmith, Boron, so he wants to try using alchemy to extract the metal. He's got iron ore, silver ore, copper ore, and even some magic iron ore. So he starts off with the iron and tries to make an iron ingot from it. Normally this would require a large furnace and hours of work, but with Takumi's alchemy he can do it all at once, but it drains a ton of his mana in the process. His first attempt at ore extraction was successful and Takumi is really excited. So he wants to keep extracting as much as possible so he can make stuff with it later. A couple of hours have gone by, so Molly comes over to Takumi's house to bring him some dinner, but when she opens the door, she is shocked to find him passed out on the floor looking like he's been sucked dry. Takumi had overdone it with the ore extraction and nearly died from mana depletion, but Martha and Bunga gave him a recovery potion, so he's alright now and can keep practicing his alchemy, although they made him promise not to overwork himself anymore. Over time, Takumi extracted a bunch of iron, copper, and even a bit of gold too, so he was able to make a ton of useful tools with them. And once he was done with alchemy practice, he would spend time with Boron in the forge learning how to make all kinds of weapons. The play turns out really well, and once Boron is done making the sheath, it will be complete. Takumi's blacksmithing skill is now level 40, so he's done practicing that for now and decides to move on to something else. He goes over to Bunga and asks if he can borrow a couple of potions, and Bunga has no problem lending him some, but all the potions are basic so he won't get much use out of them. Takumi tells him that that's fine, since all he needs is a template for what a potion should look like. He's thinking of making some potions of his own with all those herbs he gathered in the forest, and Bunga is happy to support Takumi in any way he can, so he offers to buy some potions from him if he completes the first batch. Takumi thanks Bunga, and after he gets the basic potion, he starts working on his own version. He makes it with some hillcock leaves and water, and when he's done, he puts it in a glass jar so he can compare it to the one he got from Bunga. Both of them are blue, but the one Takumi made is notably more blue than the one he got from Bunga. Plus, it seems to have magic in it, but Takumi isn't sure if this is a success or not. He's going to have to test the potion himself to make sure it isn't harmful, but he doesn't want to end up dying if it turns out to be poisonous, so he decides to build up some poison tolerance. And the best way for him to do that is to eat whatever this is until he's about to die, and then use healing magic to cure himself. He's been doing this for a couple of hours now, and he feels like absolute shit. On the bright side, curing himself so much has granted him the purification skill, and that's definitely going to come in handy at some point. As Takumi is getting back to his feet, he hears a noise behind him and finds a massive boar staring him down. The boar clearly isn't friendly, so Takumi grabs his spear and gets ready to defend himself. But as the boar charges at him and he tries to use the spear, it shatters on contact, leaving the boar unharmed and Takumi without a weapon. He tries to use all the magic he has available to him, but none of them do any damage to the boar, so he's starting to panic here. And just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, he notices a poison spider behind him and it looks like it's getting ready to attack, so Takumi is completely cornered. However, instead of attacking him, the spider attacks the boar instead, causing it to miss Takumi. But the boar is still coming for him, so he has to think of something fast. So far, all of his physical attacks have failed, but there's still one thing he hasn't tried yet. As the boar charges at him again, he jumps into the air and at the moment of contact, he uses his alchemy skill on the boar's head and breaks it down. Thanks to his quick thinking, he managed to survive, and now that he's safe, he decides to go check on the spider since it helped him out earlier. The spider is in really poor shape after it got hit by the boar. He decides to heal it so it doesn't die, and afterwards he gets up so he can return to the village. But then he receives a notification telling him that he has successfully tamed the spider. He didn't realize it was even possible to take a spider, but he's hesitant to take it with him since the spider is considered a dangerous monster. However, the spider hits him with the cutesy eyes, so he decides to accept it as his pet anyway, and to make it official, he names her Maple. A little while later, Takumi returns to the village and shows everyone the giant boar he killed. They are all amazed that he could defeat something like that, but even more so that he managed to tame a poisonous spider since no one has ever managed to do that before. That aside, Takumi suggests that they all share the boar since he can't finish it alone, so that night a massive feast is held in his honor. While everyone else is having fun, Bunga brings the valuable leftovers from the boar to Takumi and tells him he can sell them for money if he heads to the nearest city, Bolton. So that will be Takumi's next destination. All the while, Goddess Nolyn has been watching over him and she's really happy with how well he is progressing. One of her fellow goddesses asks her what she's hoping to achieve by giving Takumi such special treatment. She gave him a special body, a special blessing, and on top of that, she can send him a whole year into the past before Sidonia actually activated the summoning spell that brought him here. But Nolyn says she doesn't have a particular reason for it. She's just doing what she thinks is right. The story continues. We see one morning, Takumi finds himself tied up in bed, and he already knows Maple was the one behind it. Maple apologizes, but Takumi has been so busy lately that she felt really lonely and just wanted to get his attention. Takumi realizes he has been so focused on his work that he barely spends any time with Maple, so he decides to take a break from work for the day and play with Maple, which makes her really happy. Just then, Martha walks in to bring Takumi some lunch. It looks like something weird is going on between Takumi and Maple, but Takumi assures her that it's not what she thinks. Martha takes his word for it, but she can't help but notice that the silk Maple produced looks really nice, so she plans to milk Maple dry of as much silk as she can make. Later that day, Martha has successfully created a spider silk shirt, and all the ladies in the village are in love with the texture of the fabric. Takumi hadn't realized spider silk was such a hot commodity, so the ladies explain that spider silk is a luxury item, so only nobles ever get to buy it. Martha asks Maple if she could make some more fabric for her, so Maple starts squirting it out. But this is going to take a while, so she isn't going to get to play with Takumi anymore. Takumi is a little disappointed since he was looking forward to spending time with Maple for once, but he's still got things to do anyway, so he's not too bothered. It has been roughly a month since Takumi first came to this village, and he intends to head to the city soon to study his alchemy, but he can't bring himself to say goodbye to all the villagers after spending so much time with them. Takumi goes to meet with Boron at the forge so he can continue his blacksmithing practice, and before long they made a chest plate that fits Takumi perfectly, as well as some steel-toe boots. Boron tells him that the boots will be useful if he ever needs to kick anything, but Takumi doesn't intend to do any fighting since he just wants to be an alchemist. Just then, Bunga shows up and he's glad to see that Takumi's armor is finally complete, but he's going to miss him once he's gone. He knows Takumi can't stay here forever if he wants to expand his production business, so it's the logical move for him to head to the city, where he can sell more of his goods and get a reliable supply of materials. A trader from Bolton is going to come to this village in a couple of days, so Bunga arranged for Takumi a ride with him on his way back to Bolton. They are sad to see him go, but they know this is for the best, so they tell Takumi to start getting his stuff ready. Takumi thanks them for all their help and starts heading back to his house so he can pack up. But along the way, he runs into Martha while she's carrying a bucket of meat. He asks her what she's up to, so Martha explains that she's on her way to throw away the innards of a horned rabbit that Bunga caught. Apparently the innards are the most delicious part of the rabbit, but they need to be processed thoroughly to remove all diseases and parasites. This village doesn't have the equipment necessary to do that, so she has to throw the meat away so no one gets sick. However, Takumi tells her that won't be necessary since he can just purify the meat. He bends down and uses Purification Magic, so the meat in the bucket should be safe to eat now. But while Martha is indeed thankful, she is equally stunned that Takumi can use light magic. She tells him that he probably shouldn't reveal that he can use light magic when he leaves this village, because there are very few people in this world who are capable of that. So if people found out he could use it, it would draw a lot unwanted attention. Takumi takes note of her warning and promises to be careful about revealing his power. But in the meantime, while he's still in the village, he plans to use every bit of his power to make their lives better. He uses earth magic to build up a brick wall for the village's safety, and for convenience, he builds them a water pump as well as a couple of other amenities. By the time he is done, this place looks like a whole new village, so when the merchant arrives, he barely recognizes it. Bunga comes out to greet Papek, and after completing a trade deal, Takumi walks up so they can start going. Papek has already heard a lot about Takumi from Bunga, so he introduces himself and everyone asks if Takumi has all his stuff ready. Takumi assures them he hasn't forgotten anything, but there is one thing he wants to give them though. He pulls out one of his potions from his bag and gives it to Bunga. He already dropped off about 100 of these bottles at Bunga's house, so in the event of a disaster, he wants Bunga that he use these to heal any injuries. Papek is left in shock after seeing the potion Takumi made, so he asks to take a closer look and it is definitely a high-level potion, although Takumi doesn't seem to realize it. The rest of the villagers soon show up to bid Takumi farewell, so Papek says he will wait for them to finish their goodbyes before he leaves. Molly says goodbye to Maple, who's sleeping in Takumi's sack, and Martha hands him an outfit she and the other ladies made for him out of maple silk. Takumi is really grateful for their thoughtful gift and thanks everyone once more for being so kind to him, even though they haven't known him long. He then gets in the carriage and all the villagers give him a huge send-off, telling him he will always be welcome in their village. As Papek and Takumi head for Bolton, Papek mentions that the people of that village seem to really love him. Even the others in the carriage can tell that Takumi was practically family to them, and such a goodbye really tugs at Heath's heartstrings. By the way, these guys are heading for Bolton as well, so the blonde guy introduces himself as Heath, the redhead is Riel, and the gloomy-looking guy over there is named Booger. They are all part of a C-rank party named Lion Fong, and they are currently acting as Papek's bodyguards, although this region is pretty peaceful, so there isn't actually much for them to do. Riel notices that Takumi is holding onto his bag really tightly, so they ask him if something precious is inside and Takumi answers, saying his pet killer spider is sleeping inside. The group can't believe Takumi managed to tame a killer spider, so Riel asks to see it, but he's being really creepy about it, so Maple ends up head-butting him in the face. Takumi begins apologizing profusely for what Maple did, but the others tell him there's nothing to be sorry about since Riel deserved it. In fact, Heath wouldn't be surprised if Maple's encounter with Riel makes her fear all humans from now on. But that doesn't seem to be the case, since she seems to have taken a liking to Booger. While everyone starts fawning over Maple, Papek calls Takumi to the front because he wants to talk about the potion he saw Takumi holding earlier. He asks if there are any more of those in stock, because if so, he would love to buy some. Takumi doesn't really mind selling Papek the potions, but all of a sudden a horse stops and it looks like there's trouble with a foot. There is a horde of goblins surrounding the carriage for an attack, which is really bad news, but the others seem pretty excited since this means they finally get to do something. So they tell Takumi and Papek to sit back and let them do all the work as they step out onto the field. There are roughly 20 goblins out in the field, so they are pretty confident they can handle this and start fighting. Riel shoots some down with his bow, while Booger and Heath attack the rest with their mace and axe. Overall, it doesn't take long for them to wipe out all the goblins, so once they are done, they get to work dissecting the goblins so they can collect the magic stones. And from what Maple has seen so far, she really likes Booger. She hates Riel and she doesn't really care about Heath. Shortly after, everyone got back on the carriage and their journey continued for the next 3 days until they finally arrived in Bolton. Once they enter the city, the members of Lion Fong head to the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission. And Takumi follows them there, since he needs to register with the guild to stay in this city. He would have preferred to register with the Alchemist Guild, but there isn't one here, so he's going to have to become an adventurer instead. The receptionist, Hans, tells Takumi that he can just use the Adventurer Guild card as his identification, and as long as he does his simple quest once every month, it won't expire at all. Takumi ends up registering as an adventurer and also presents Maple as his pet. After all the registrations are complete, Takumi heads to Papek's trading company to work on a deal for the potions. He has roughly 103 different potions in stock, and all of them are of extremely high quality. So Papek is prepared to pay 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion, and 50 silver coins for each mana potion. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that he would make over 7 million yen from this single deal. He thinks that's way too much money, but on the contrary, Papek informs him that he could have made a lot more money if he already had a reputation as a producer. On that note, since Takumi intends to become a producer in this city, Papek recommends that he get a house with a workshop attached for convenience reasons, but Takumi hadn't even thought about where he would be living once he got here. Papek decides to help him out a little and calls for his assistant Thomas, so he can show Takumi a good property with an affordable rate. However, when Takumi finally sees the house, it looks way more like a mansion, so he doesn't think he can afford it. Thomas assures him that the mansion is quite affordable, and he can guarantee that there are no ghosts here, so he won't have to worry about that. Takumi spots the workshop connected to the house and he starts considering the purchase since this place would be really accommodating for his work, and he can afford to pay for it since he got a lot of money from selling those potions to Papek. After a little deliberation, he eventually decides to pay for the mansion, so he tells Thomas he'll take it. Thomas is glad to hear that and says he will get started on the paperwork immediately. So Takumi can move in tomorrow if he wants, but as they are walking through the city streets, Takumi smells something foul in the air. Thomas can tell that the smell is bothering Takumi, so he explains that the foul stench is coming from the sewers. Rich people have magical purifiers to clean their sewage, but the main city sewers have no such luxury. Magic purifiers are really rare since they are only found in ancient ruins and dungeons, so they are too expensive to implement in the city sewers. Some priests are periodically hired to manually clean the sewers with purification magic, but the sewers are still filthy most of the time. The next day, Takumi and Maple move into their new house, and the first thing Takumi wants to do is find a solution to the sewer problem. He gets a piece of quartz and clay from Papek's company, and after using magic to shape it, he uses fire magic combined with space-time magic to bake it quickly. After doing that for a while, Takumi's mana was completely drained, so he had to drink a couple of mana potions. But on the bright side, he did manage to complete his creation, a modern toilet. Just then, he hears Papek screaming from his living room, so he comes out to check what's going on and finds Papek wrapped head to toe in Maple's silk. Takumi asks Maple why she would do such a thing, but she thought Papek would find this to be fun. In her defense, the comforting feel of her silk does put Papek to sleep, but that doesn't make it right. So Takumi sincerely apologizes for Maple's actions. Papek tells Takumi it's alright, but getting swaddled so suddenly it'd scare him a little, so he needs to use Takumi's restroom real quick. However, as soon as he enters, he comes back out and starts asking what this marvel of technology is. Takumi comes over and explains that this thing is a toilet. He attached it to a magical purification device so it automatically cleans itself once you're done with your business. Basically, after you take a dump, it uses purification magic to break down your shit into inorganic materials, and then that gets flushed down the drain. The system makes sense to Papek, but the only way someone could possibly have made such a thing would be if you had an aptitude for light magic. Takumi realizes he may have messed up since Martha clearly warned him against using his light magic openly, so he asks Papek to please keep this a secret for him. Papek understands why Takumi would want to keep his abilities a secret, so he promises not to tell anyone, but he absolutely must have some of these toilets, so he asks Takumi if he can make 100 of them for him. Takumi is hesitant to agree since making just one toilet was a lot of work, but since Papek is being so insistent, he agrees to do it as long as Papek can provide the raw materials. Papek is really happy to hear that, but he can't expect Takumi to make all those toilets by himself, so he suggests that Takumi should make a slave contract. Takumi is taken aback by the suggestion since he would never want to get a slave, but Papek points out that if Takumi is trying to keep his abilities a secret, then it would be best to get a slave to help with his work, since his slave will be bound to secrecy. Having aptitude for light magic is a really good big deal since it means you were chosen by God, and as such the Church of Divine Light would probably come after Takumi to force him to work for them. They make a lot of profit by monopolizing purification magic, so Papek doubts they would be happy to learn that commoners can have access to cheap purifications through Takumi's toilets. But Papek or he has an idea of how to get around the church, so Takumi doesn't need to worry about it for now. The most important thing is making sure that the church doesn't find out about his light magic. That's why getting a slave would be the best option for him, but Takumi is strictly against slavery, so he says he will just do all the work by himself. Just then, his guild card begins glowing, so Takumi takes a look at it, and it displays a message saying he needs to complete a verification quest to maintain his status as an adventurer. So it looks like he won't have time to make the toilets by himself after all, so he caves and agrees to buy a slave. Papek takes Takumi to the Mulan Trading Company, since they are the most ethical slave traders around. Papek goes off to talk with the owner so he can get Takumi a good deal, and in the meantime, Takumi heads out into the garden because it looks pretty. There he finds a beautiful elf girl sitting on a terrace, but the second she sees Takumi, she tells him to get out of here. The story continues. We see Papek introduces Takumi to the owner of the slave trading company, Mulan, and tells her that Takumi is interested in purchasing a slave from her. Although he mentions that Takumi was really reluctant about the idea of purchasing a slave, Mulan asks him if there's a specific reason for this. So Takumi explains that in the land where he comes from, selling and buying people was abolished long ago, so doing it here doesn't sit right with him. Mulan can understand Takumi's concerns, but she assures him that in this nation, at least, the rights and privileges of slaves are preserved to some extent. Basically, it works like this. The owner pledges to respect the slave's basic rights, providing food, clothing, and shelter, while the slave pledges to fulfill their duties. Said duties are clearly laid out in the contract for the slave, but aside from that, the contract also makes it impossible for either the master or the slave to cause lethal harm to one another. Takumi is quite pleased to learn this since it means the slave contract is pretty much a regular job with some rules attached. Mulan goes on to explain that there are several different kinds of slave contracts. In the case where someone becomes due to debt, they will be contracted until they earn enough money to pay back that debt. Other contracts are more permanent and are usually taken by criminals or people who end up being captured in war as an alternative to death. However, the large majority of slave contracts are made by those who were illegally forced into it by bandits. Papek thinks the most suitable one for Takumi would be a war slave, since they can't be released without their master's permission, and while Mulan could certainly make that happen, she asks why there is a need to make sure the slave can never leave Takumi. Papek starts talking about how talented Takumi is with production, and how he doesn't want his secrets to be stolen, but Mulan wants to hear the reason from Takumi himself. Takumi explains that he is a producer, so naturally he would like to focus on his work as much as possible. But that's a little hard to do, since he also has to fulfill quests from the Adventurers Guild. He's currently living in a mansion, so he will need someone to help manage it while he does his work, and do some particular skills he possesses. He would like to make sure his slave can't tell anyone about him. Additionally, since he will be taking on quests from the Adventurers Guild and harvesting ingredients himself, he also needs his slaves to be a capable fighter so they don't get hurt when they accompany him. Mulan realizes that Takumi has no ill intentions, but there's no way she's allowing him to force a single slave to do both housework and combat, so she'll only work with him if he agrees to buy 2 separate slaves instead. That being said, she knows someone who would be perfect as Takumi's housekeeper, so she calls for Maria to come into the room. Maria was forced into slavery as a child and has been trained in reading, writing, math, and general housekeeping, so she'd be a good fit for the job. Maria says she can handle the housework of a mansion all by herself, and Takumi is glad to hear it. But Maria can tell that he's deep in thought, so she asks if something is wrong. Takumi tells her he's just a little confused since he doesn't understand why no one has bought yet Maria, considering how cute and capable she is. Maria gets all embarrassed by Takumi calling her cute, so he apologizes since it might have been inappropriate to say. Maria calms down and tells Takumi that she can only do the housekeeping work outlined in the contract and nothing else. Takumi says he's fine with that since he only wants her to do housekeeping work, but Maria wants to make it very clear that she won't do anything else. Takumi doesn't understand why she's talking about it so much, since Mulan already explained how these contracts work, but then Maria blurts out that she can't sleep with Takumi. Now Takumi gets embarrassed as well, but he assures Maria that he really does only want her as a housekeeper, not a meat keeper. With that said, Takumi asks Maria if she still wants to form a contract with him, and she says she'd be happy to work with him. Now that that's settled, Mulan says she'll begin working on the contract for Maria. But as for the battle servant, she says she unfortunately doesn't have anyone who fits the description. Maria hears Mulan say this and calls BS because she knows Sofia is still here, but Mulan doesn't take kindly to being called out, so she tells Maria to go back to her room and start packing her things. Once Maria is gone, Takumi asks Mulan if what Maria said was true, and Mulan admits that there is a battle slave in the building, but she doesn't think Sofia would be a good fit for Takumi, since she's got a lot of problems. Mulan wants to end the discussion here, but Takumi is kind of curious about Sofia, so he asks to see her. Mulan reluctantly agrees to take Takumi meet Sofia, and when they arrive at her room, Sofia is surprised to see that the visitor is the boy she met in the courtyard earlier. Mulan informs Takumi of Sofia's history, and explains that she was captured as a slave of war in the battle between the Kingdom of Triaria and the Kingdom of Yugur, although this all happened more than 50 years ago. Takumi is shocked to find out that Sofia is more than 50 years old, so Mulan goes on to explain that the Kingdom of Yugur was an elf nation and elves naturally live long lives. Sofia hasn't been able to form a contract with anyone, because she has a hideous scar on her ears and her right hand and left leg both have impaired movement. This soup already be a deal breaker for anyone looking to buy a battle slave, but on top of that, she also lost use of the elemental magic that elves are most known for, so it's likely that she has a curse on her. Given all these facts, Mulan doesn't think Sofia will be able to help Takumi on his quests, but Takumi wants to confirm it for himself, so he asks to have a minute alone with Sofia. Mulan decides to give him some time to talk to her, and once they are both alone, Takumi grabs Sofia's face and looks into her eyes. He isn't a fan of using appraisal on people without permission, but he needs to check what he's dealing with. He takes a look at Sofia's status screen, and to his surprise, he finds out that her stats are through the roof. Her injuries do limit her abilities and she does have a curse on her, but if Takumi can fix that, then she will be the perfect companion to have in a battle. Mulan soon comes back into the room to Takumi if he has made a decision yet, so he tells her he wants to take Sofia. Sofia can't believe he wants her and reminds him of all her flaws, but Takumi says he's going to fix it so it won't be a problem. Mulan thinks Takumi's confidence is pretty interesting, so she agrees to leave Sofia as Takumi's care. A few minutes later, Mulan finalizes the terms of the contract, so the final step is to execute it. The three of them gather together, and Mulan uses magic to bind them to the terms of the contract. So once she's done, Maria and Sofia officially become Takumi's slaves. Maria thanks him for purchasing her and promises to work hard to live up to his expectations, and so does Sofia. The three eventually return to Takumi's house, and as soon as he opens the door, Maple comes jumping out because she's excited to see him again. Both Maria and Sofia are worried for Takumi's safety, so Sofia is about to attack Maple. But before she does, Takumi stops her and explains that Maple is actually his pet, Killer Spider. The two find it strange, but they decide to just act like it's normal, and a little while later, Takumi shows them to one of the empty rooms in the mansion. Sofia and Maria really like it, so Takumi tells them that Sofia can have this one, and Maria can take the room next door. Neither of them can believe that Takumi is willing to give them their own rooms, but it's not like he's using the rooms anyway, so he thinks it would be nice if someone got some use out of it, at least. Additionally, there's also a large bath, so he tells them that once they are done unpacking, they can use the bath whenever they like, and Maria is really excited about it. Later on, Sofia and Maria get into the bath, and Maria talks about how glad she is that Takumi bought Sofia as well. If she's being honest, she thought Mulan was never going to let Maria leave because over the past 50 years, no matter how much was offered, Mulan rejected anyone who offered to buy Sofia. So for her to sell Sofia to Takumi, she must have seen some good in him. Sofia admits that Takumi seems kind, but she's still a bit skeptical since they know so little about him. While Mulan was drawing up the contracts for the sale, Sophie got a glimpse of Takumi's file, and most of Takumi's history records, like hometown or lineage, were left blank. Sophie is keeping that information secret. Then there must be something he is hiding. After they are done with their bath, they head outside and are shocked to see that Takumi already prepared dinner for them. Maria is especially devastated since household work is meant to be her job, so if Takumi handles everything himself, then she's as useless as a toilet. Takumi explains that he was just trying to make Maria's first day in the job a little easier, but if it makes her feel better, he will let her handle the rest of the chores on her own. For now, he asks them to sit down so they can all have dinner together, but Sofia is hesitant since servants usually don't get to eat at the same table as their master. Takumi understands that she may think his behavior is strange for a slave owner, but he doesn't want her to get stuck up on tradition. And speaking of tradition, he doesn't really like the fact that they keep calling him master, so he asks if they can just call him by his name instead. Sofia asks if that's a formal order, but Takumi doesn't want to have to force her to call him by name if she doesn't feel comfortable with it. Although, Maria seems fine with calling him by name. The next day, Takumi heads to Papek's trading company to pick up a package he ordered, and Papek says he did his best to wrap it up securely. But he still wants Takumi to be careful when carrying it home. On his way home, Takumi notices a church nearby, so he heads inside and kneels down to pray to Nolyn. He thanks her for all the skills she gave him, since they've really helped him. That there's something he's been meaning to ask her. In the time he has spent in this world, he learnt that the Holy Empire of Sidonia controls the religious doctrine here, so he doesn't understand why Nolyn has so much beef with them. Just then, Takumi hears Nolyn's voice and sees her standing in front of him, so he freaks out a little. Nolyn explains that she heard him praying to her, so she brought him up here so they could have a little chat. And to answer his question from before, she doesn't like Sidonia because they don't follow her will. There are two religions in this world, the Church of Creation and the Church of Divine Light. The Church of Creation has worshipped Nolyn since it began, but the Church of Divine Light just does whatever the hell it wants. The Sidonia Empire ended up going on several crusades to spread their religion forceful means. But while all this was happening, Nolyn chose to stay out of it, since she didn't want to get involved with the petty affairs of humans. Takumi points out that that was dumb move, since the only reason Sidonia is able to activate the summoning spell that brought him here was because Nolyn didn't intervene until it was too late. And yeah, it sounds bad when he puts it like that, but she gave him all her blessings to make up for her mistake, although there is something she needs to tell him. Most of her blessings will remain with him forever, but there is one that will fade away, and that's the unusually great luck he has been having recently. She basically gave him a beginner's tutorial by allowing him to meet such nice and helpful people, but soon he will end up meeting people with sinister intentions. So from now on, the results of his actions completely depend on him. A little while later, Takumi returns home, but as soon as he walks in the door, he trips over Maple, who is really excited to see him. Both Sofia and Maria come to check on him, but when Sofia tries to help pick up the package Takumi brought, he quickly stores it in his item box to stop her from touching it. He then gets up and says he's going to do some work in his workshop, so they shouldn't bother him for a while. But Sofia is incredibly suspicious because that package had high-grade magical wrapping paper on it, so it must have been something dangerous. She follows Takumi to his workshop to see what he's up to, and she's horrified to see him dipping a knife in poison and cutting himself with it. He immediately heals himself afterwards, but you've got to admit, he looks crazy doing this. So as soon as he randomly mentions Maria's name, Sofia thinks he plans to do something to her and attacks him. Or at least she tries to, but she faints from exhaustion almost immediately, so she just collapses on top of Takumi. Takumi checks her status to figure out what's wrong with her, and he discovers that she is suffering from extreme exhaustion, likely due to her curse. Wounds like this normally wouldn't be that difficult to heal. But because of the curse, it takes a lot of effort for Takumi to finally heal her hand, and once he's done, his light magic levels up. He later carries Sofia up to her room, and since his light magic leveled up, he now has enough power to dispel her curse. So he pours all this magic into it, and eventually he's able to fully heal Sofia, as well as lift her curse. She's still unconscious due to the exhaustion, but she should be fine once she gets a little rest. Couple hours later, Sofia wakes up and when she sees Maria, she warns her to run because from what she saw, she is sure Takumi is an absolute lunatic. Maria doesn't know what Sofia is talking about, but she's sure that Takumi is a good person more than ever before. She holds a mirror up to show Sofia what Takumi did for her, and she is shocked to realize that her body has been healed and her magic has returned. She heads outside to talk to Takumi about it, and he confirms that he did get rid of her curse. It took a lot of pain and hard work to level up his skill, but he tells her she doesn't have to worry about it, since he already promised to heal her. Sofia realizes that she had completely misjudged Takumi, so she kneels down and pledges to serve Takumi for the rest of her life for the kindness he has shown her. The story continues. We see the next morning, Takumi heads to the library to see if he can find any information about alchemy, but it turns out that the entire library only has 4 books on alchemy. Takumi is confused and wonders why alchemy isn't more popular when it's so simple to understand, but in reality it isn't easy at all. All the alchemy texts available are written in this world's ancient language, so the only reason Takumi can understand any of what's written here is because Nolyn gave him a blessing that allows him to understand every language in this world. Later that day, Takumi, Maria, and Sofia finish making a bunch of toilets, and while there's still a lot more to go, they're making good progress, so Takumi thinks he should be able to take a break for toilet making for a while. If he won't be making any more toilets for now, Maria asks Takumi what he intends to do and Takumi answers that he plans to go on some journeys in the near future. Specifically, he wants to try finding new alchemy ingredients, and while he's at it, he wants to see the unique sights this world has to offer and maybe explore some ruins along the way. He already plans to take Sofia with him as his bodyguard, so he's going to have to ask Maria to stay behind and take care of the house while he's gone. However, Maria doesn't like the sound of that. She asks Takumi if she can accompany him on his journey, but he doesn't think that'd be a good idea since the journey is bound to be dangerous. Plus, he mainly hired Maria because he needed a maid to take care of the mansion, so it would defeat the purpose if he took her with him. Maria understands Takumi's point, but being left alone in the mansion would make her feel terribly lonely, so she pleads the Takumi to reconsider. Takumi would feel bad about leaving Maria all alone, but before he makes any decisions, there's something he needs to check, so he grabs Maria's face and uses appraisal to check her stats. And unexpectedly, Maria is pretty stacked. Don't get me wrong, she's not overpowered, but she could definitely handle herself in a fight, so Takumi agrees to bring her along for the journey as long as she's sure she can handle. Sofia says she's willing to teach Maria how to use magic and fight to make sure she is ready for any possible threats, and Takumi likes the sound of that, so he asks Sofia to train both him and Maria. Since they've decided that Maria will be joining the expedition, Takumi thinks it's about time he starts making equipment for everyone. So to start, he asks Sofia what kind of weapon she would like. Sofia doesn't hesitate and begins listing off an entire arsenal of weapons she would like, but that's to be expected since she is an experienced warrior. Maria, on the other hand, doesn't know much about weapons, but she did receive a little short sword training from Mulan, so she tells Takumi that a set of battle knives will be fine for her. However, Sofia points out that having only battle knives will put Maria at a disadvantage when it comes to reach, so she should probably get a spear as well. Maria doesn't know how to use a spear, so Sofia offers to give her a quick training bondage to show her the basics. And while they do that, Takumi begins working on the weapons. Doesn't take him long to finish crafting all the blades, but it drains a ton of his mana, so he has to drink a mana potion to recover before he can continue. The final step for the blades is for Takumi to cast an attack and auto-repair enchantment on them, so he doesn't have to perform maintenance as often, and once that's done, the blades are finally complete. Now he's going to move on to the handles, but since Maria requested for battle knives, she's going to need a sheath for them. And even though Takumi is a gentleman, he's still a man of culture, so imagining Maria's thick thighs with knives on them nearly makes him pass out. Moving on, the next thing he needs to make is the armor for the girls, but rather than simply asking them to let him measure their sizes, Takumi has a much better idea. He opens up his item box and pulls out 2 life-size dolls of Maria and Sofia he had already made with his Appraisal X skill, but don't ask why he made them though. As for the armor itself, Takumi plans to make it using maple silk and some of the hide he got from the armored boar. And when it comes to the design, he's never had the chance to make armor for others before, so he decides to let his mind run wild and try out all his outfit fantasies with those dolls. After several days and several redesigns, Takumi finally gives the armor to Maria and Sofia, and it looks great on them. He asks the two if they like it, and both are honestly surprised by how well it fits, despite the fact that Takumi never asked for their measurements. It's almost as if he had duplicates of them that he could test the outfits on, but that would be crazy, right? Takumi changes the subject before they start getting suspicious, and asks them what they think of the weapons he made for them. Sofia pulls out the sword Takumi made for her and she says it feels perfect. The same goes for Maria as she tests out her battle knives and she is grateful for the equipment he made for her. There's one more thing Takumi made for the two of them, so he pulls out some rings and tells them it should help with their magic casting. Sofia and Maria accept the rings, but they feel bad about troubling Takumi so much, since rings like these are bound to consume a ton of mana. Takumi admits that it was exhausting, but it helped him level up his ice and lightning magic, so it was well worth the effort. After all the equipment had been tested, the three of them head to the guild, since Takumi needs to register Maria and Sofia at the guild so they can register as adventurers as well. Since this is their first time at the guild, Maria and Sofia are given the H rank. And while Takumi is here, the receptionist reminds him that he needs to complete at least one quest in order to maintain his status as an adventurer, so Takumi heads over the notice board to see if there are any good quests he can pick out. He is hoping to pick an H or G rank quest so he doesn't have to do too much work, but Sofia thinks he would be better off choosing one of the higher difficulty quests since it would help him raise his rank. A couple of bastards overhear that Takumi is H rank, so they think they can intimidate him into running away so they can have fun with Sofia and Maria. They tell Takumi that they are all D rank, so there's no way he could handle them all at once, and they have no problem with beating up a random guy for fun. Maria is about to step in and knock some sense into these idiots, but Takumi stops her and says he will handle it himself. He's absolutely terrified, but these guys not only disrespected him, but more importantly, they disrespected his friends, so he can't back down. The D-rank guys are offended that an H-rank noob like Takumi thinks he stands a chance against them. So the guy with the pot belly tries to punch him with all his might and Takumi just lets it happen, but the only one who gets hurt is the D-rank guy because he broke his hand with that little stunt. All of a sudden the guildmaster Barak shows up, and he demands to know what happened here because fighting is prohibited in the guild. At first he thinks Takumi is to blame for all the commotion since he is completely unharmed and the other guy has a broken arm, but Maria tells him Takumi did nothing wrong. The receptionist also backs up their story and explains to the guildmaster that all Takumi did was take a punch to the face. The guildmaster still wants to get to the bottom of this, so for now he asks someone to drive the potbelly guy away and tells Takumi and his party to come with him since he has a few questions to ask. He believes that Takumi was just defending himself, but he doesn't understand how he did it and would like an explanation. Takumi is a little uncomfortable about revealing personal skill information, but the guildmaster assures him that all this information will remain confidential. In that case, Takumi explains that when the guy threw the punch at him, he opened his item box and pulled out a bit of charcoal, which he then used to coat his upper body for defense. And to make sure he wouldn't get hurt, he synthesized the charcoal into diamond. That explains how he broke that guy's fist without doing anything. But while they are on the topic, the guildmaster thinks it would be a good idea to promote Takumi to D rank immediately. He clearly has the skills to be D rank, and if his rank is high, idiots like the last guy won't be bold enough to go after him just because he has pretty ladies with him. Takumi doesn't think it'd be right for him to get an automatic promotion for no reason, so Han suggests that Takumi and the others could complete a few difficult quests to justify their rank promotion, and both Sofia and Maria seem to think it's a good idea, so Takumi agrees as well. The quest they were assigned involves exterminating goblins and kobolds and then gather Mariel herbs, so they head out into the forest to begin. Maple acts as the group's scout and warns them that there is a group of 4 goblins up ahead. Sofia takes the initiative and volunteers to handle the first 2, so she dashes forward and cuts them down in one swing. The remaining 2 are tripped up by Maple's web, and once they fall to the ground, Maria and Takumi stab them through the neck. Takumi is glad they are doing so well against the monsters, but with that said, they've been encountering way too many monsters out here. They've already killed nearly 100 goblins and kobolds, so Sofia thinks there must be a monster encampment nearby. And if that is the case, then there is likely also a goblin general there. A goblin general is an C-rank monster, meaning it would usually require at least 5 D-rank parties to defeat it, but with Sofia's spirit magic, Maria's earth magic and Takumi's elemental magic, she is confident that they should be able to beat it. Takumi still feels a bit uneasy about taking on such a challenge, but since Maria and Sofia seem so confident in their strength, he's willing to go along with it. Not to mention they still got Maple on their side, but all of a sudden, Maple tells Takumi she's about to evolve soon, so she can't fight anymore. Takumi understands and opens a pocket dimension so she can rest inside. But just like me, Sofia and Maria have many questions, like when the hell did Takumi learn to create pocket dimensions? Takumi brushes it off like it's normal and says this is just one of his skills, but more importantly, since Maple can't fight with him anymore. Takumi warns the others that they won't have as much support as they initially thought, but Sofia still thinks they can pull it off. They soon arrive at the goblin camp, and after a little reconnaissance, Sofia concludes that there are around 400 goblins here. Takumi asks her if they really have to fight all those goblins, and normally they would, but Sofia's reconnaissance also revealed that there are no humans in the area, so they are free to blow this place up with magic. The 3 of them prepare their strongest attack spells, and all at the same time they unleash hell on the goblin camp. By the time they are done, almost all the goblins have been killed, so the only ones left are the goblin general and a few of the goblin knights. Sofia says she will handle the goblin knights, so Takumi is left to deal with the goblin general, and rather than fight it with his spear, he opts to just set it on fire to finish it off. Once they finally confirm that all the goblins are dead, they gather all the magic stones and return to the guild, but the 3 of them are absolutely exhausted from all that work. Han can hardly believe that they managed to complete their quest and even took down a goblin general in only half a day, so he asks them to come to the meeting room for a minute because the guildmaster wants to see them. Barak is both amazed and angry that Takumi would do something as reckless as face an entire goblin camp with a single party, but just as he is about to begin scolding Takumi, his pocket dimension opens up and Maple pops out. She has now evolved into an arachne, so everyone is excited to see her new form, and at this point, Barak decides to just let the whole reckless battle thing slide since Takumi's party clearly isn't normal. Once they get back home, Maria asks Takumi if he has any spare cloth since she wants to make underwear for herself and Sofia. But Takumi has a much better idea for an underwear design, so he offers to make it for her instead. Just then, Maple pops out of the pocket dimension and tells Takumi that Papek is here to see him, so Takumi goes to meet with him and is informed that the Lord of Bolton, Marcus Godwin, wants to meet with him. Takumi would like to avoid meeting Marcus Godwin, but given the situation he has no choice. Takumi later arrives at Godwin's castle, and thankfully Godwin seems to be a reasonable man since the first thing he does is thank Takumi for making all those toilets, because it greatly improved the sanitation of the town. Not to mention that Takumi took down a goblin encampment that would have become a major problem if left unchecked. He recognizes that Takumi is an asset to the nation, so he warns him that he will need to be careful because Sidonia is bound to come after him eventually. A few days later, Takumi finally finishes making the underwear for Sofia and Maria, but it was way harder than he thought it would be, so he looks absolutely drained. Sofia and Maria are really grateful and tell him that they love the design, so he absent-mindedly asks them if they would like to try the underwear on now so he can see how it fits. A second later, he realizes that he just implied something inappropriate, so runs out of the room in embarrassment, and Maria and Sofia are a little disappointed because they were totally willing to do it if he had stayed. The story continues. We see after all that excitement, Takumi had to cool off, so he decided that his next project would be to create refrigerators. Once he is done, he explains to the girls that the fridges will be used to keep food cold so it doesn't go bad, and they are all excited to feel the cold air coming from it. To create the fridges, Takumi synthesized iron, chromium, and nickel into stainless steel, and then he added a magical device enchanted with cooling magic. But unfortunately, his fridge can't run Halo. Even so, Maria thanks Takumi for it, since she can now cook with fresh ingredients whenever she wants. Takumi intends to give one of the fridges to Maria, and the other two will be sent over to Papek so he can sell them. And once that's done, Takumi plans to move on to his next project. Sofia asks him if he's going to be making something new again, but actually Takumi is thinking about making some adjustments to their equipment. There are a few things he has been wanting to tweak ever since their fight with all those goblins, and since they'll be traveling soon, Takumi wants their gear to be as good as possible, so he'd like to make a set out of mithril and adamantite. Takumi heads to the guild to ask Hans if there are any blacksmiths around who know how to work with adamantite and mithril, but the metals are really rare, so there aren't many people who fit that description. If Hans had to guess, the only people who would be able to handle it are the dwarves from Namstal, but that's a long way away, so Takumi can't go there. Takumi accepts that he isn't going to be able to find a suitable blacksmith after all, but before he leaves, Hans tells him about a city known as Horus near the kingdom of Barcula, and if Takumi heads there, he should be able to mine some mithril and adamantite, although he might have a little trouble getting in since only members of the blacksmith guild are allowed into the mines. Luckily, Hans knows of a great way around the rules. Let's say hypothetically, of course, that Takumi just happened to accept a quest to exterminate the monsters that appear in that mine, and hypothetically happened to come across some mithril along the way, nothing would be stopping him from mining the metals then. On that note, the guildmaster appears out of nowhere and says he has the perfect quest for Takumi. He explains that the guild has been running low on tree wood lately, and winter's coming, so they need someone to gather some. The tree ants usually wander around the Horus mines, and since Takumi is looking for an excuse to go into the mines anyway, the guildmaster thinks he should be fine with doing a little wood collecting. Additionally, since Takumi is heading there anyway, the guildmaster wants him and his party to escort someone, but this is starting to sound like a lot of work. Takumi has never handled an escort mission before, so he asks why the members of Lion Fong can't do it instead. The guildmaster explains that Lion Fong is currently out on a separate mission, so they can't do it and Takumi is the only other person he can ask. Takumi eventually agrees to take on the escort mission, but he still doesn't know much about the route to Horus, so he asks Hans how long it takes to get there. Hans tells him it takes 7 days if you go by horse-drawn carriage, but it'll only take 4 days if you use a monster horse instead, since they are twice as fast as regular horse. Takumi thinks the monster horse is a great idea, so he asks if he can take one of those, but unfortunately, Riel shows up to tell him that all the monster horses are already being used by Lion's Fong. Hans is surprised to see Riel back so soon, but Riel says he and his party aren't done with their quest yet. He just happened to kill a black buffalo along the way, so he came back to drop it off before it went rancid. He's gotta head back out in the morning so he can catch up with the rest of Lion's Fong, but since Riel will be staying in town for the night, Takumi offers to let him stay at his house and have a bath. Riel is excited by the prospect of a bath, so he decides to take Takumi up on that offer. Takumi is glad to hear it, but he actually has somewhere to go after this, so he says Riel can just wait for him at his house, but Riel says he would rather accompany Takumi. In that case, Takumi lets Riel accompany him to Papek's company, and while Takumi is there, he manages to convince Papek to let him borrow a couple of his monster horses for his mission. But in return, Papek asks that Takumi sell him some of the ores he gets from the Hora's mine. Also, about the refrigerator he brought earlier, Papek really likes it, so he asks Takumi to make some more for him once he gets back from his mining trip. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's mansion, Sofia is starting to get really worried that something might have happened to him since he hasn't returned yet. Later that evening, Takumi is walking back home with Riel, and he apologizes for dragging Riel on such a long errand even though he must be tired from his journey, but Riel doesn't mind since he is the one who said he'd accompany Takumi. Just then, Riel senses someone watching him and Takumi with great hostility. Riel can already tell that he can't beat this person with the equipment he has on hand, so he grabs Takumi's hand and starts running. However, the assailant swiftly catches up to them and kicks Riel across the face. She then reveals herself to be Sofia, and she is convinced that Riel must have been trying to kidnap Takumi, so she is prepared to cut him down without question. However, before she could kill Riel, Takumi jumps in front of him and tells Sofia she has the wrong idea about the whole situation. After explaining what's going on, Sofia kneels down to sincerely apologize to Riel for nearly killing for no reason. Riel is alright, so he forgives Sofia, but he has a lot of questions he wants to ask Takumi after this, and the list of questions only gets longer when they finally get to Takumi's house and Riel finds more cute girls there. He asks Takumi what's going on, so Takumi explains that he needed a maid to take care of a house and someone to guard him, so he hired Sofia and Maria. And then there's Maple, who happened to evolve at one point. Riel is excited to see Maple again in her new form and Maple remembers him, but she still doesn't like Riel though. Riel falls to his knees in defeat because both Booger and Heath already have wives, and even Takumi has 2 girlfriends while he is single. Takumi corrects Riel and tells him that he isn't dating either Sofia or Maria. After hearing this, Riel takes the opportunity to shoot his shot and asks Sofia if she considered going out with him, but she immediately turns him down, and so does Maria, so Riel is once again left defeated. A little while later, as Riel is crying in the bath, Takumi talks to Maria and Sofia about the mission he accepted so he can go mine some mithril and adamantite. Sofia thinks it's a good idea since Traiant wood is a precious material and everyone else is on board, so Takumi says they will head out in 3 days' time. The next morning, Riel leaves to rejoin the rest of Lion's Fong, and once he is gone, Takumi decides to begin working on some new equipment for his party's Traiant hunt. He gets himself a magic-draining tungsten carbide sword, and it is already a great weapon, but it's too big to use as it is now, which is why Takumi plans to break it down. He tries using his alchemy skill on it, but the sword seems to be resisting him, so it takes a lot more effort than usual. But eventually Takumi is able to break the metal down and make 2 separate blades with it. The blades drain the mana of any opponent who is cut with it, so Takumi is happy with the results, although it left him totally drained. 3 days later, Takumi and the others meet with Papek to collect the carriage he promised to give them, and the guy the guildmaster asked them to escort is already waiting inside. So Takumi goes to talk to him, and the man introduces himself as Gambo. The group sets out, but along the way they have to stop by a field, so Takumi and the others can hunt their Traiants. As they enter the forest, Sofia spots a Traiant trying to blend in with the other trees nearby, so she points out to Takumi and he charges forward to eliminate it. The Traiant tries to attack Takumi in the process, but Sofia and Maria have his back, so he is easily able to chop it down. However, that was just one Traiant, so they've still got an entire forest's worth to take down. They'll take too long to kill each Traiant individually, so Sofia suggests that they should use magic, and it seems to be working really well. However, they are soon confronted by an elder Traiant, and no matter how much magic they use to attack it, it keeps regenerating. The only way to finish it off is to cut down its main body in one go, so Sofia tells Takumi to coat his sword in fire and attack while she and Maria provide cover. Together they are finally able to take down the leader Traiant, and that's it for their Traiant hunting so they can continue with their journey into Horus. Upon arriving in Horus, they head to the local Adventurers Guild, and their Gambo points out a quest that says it needs people to exterminate the mole monsters in the mines. These moles eat ores, so they are considered a serious threat, and if they take this mission then they will be allowed to enter the mines. A little while later, the group is mining in the mines and they get really lucky because it doesn't take long for them to find some mithril and adamantite ore. However, the ores attract some monster moles from the ground, so they have the array to fight. Before the mole surfaces, Takumi thinks about it for a second and comes up with a great idea, so as soon as the mole shows itself, he blinds it with light magic and it collapses, so it is easily finished off. Takumi's method certainly makes it easy to take out the moles, but Sofia and Maria are a little disappointed since that means they won't get to do any fighting. Since the mining trip was successful, they all return to Bolton a few days later, and once they do, Takumi visits Kiembo's shop so he can learn how to work with mithril and adamantite. Kiembo explains the process of extracting the metal from the ore, and after a lot of effort, Takumi is able to create some mithril and adamantite, so he starts using it to make all kinds of magic-imbued gear. Once he is done with the new gear, use it to Maria and Sofia so they can test it out. The girls are amazed by how light and durable their armor is now, and it even has magic imbued in it. Takumi explains that he loaded their gear with magic that suits their preferred element, and as for his own armor, he imbued it with something called Thunderclap, and it is basically an extreme agility buff, so Takumi can move insanely fast with it. However, the second Takumi tries to do something cool by showing off how fast he is, the universe refuses to let it happen, and he ends up crashing face first into a wall. Moving on, Takumi shows them the new weapons he made, as well as the enchantments he placed in them. Sofia and Maria both love their new spears, but Sofia has a request she would like to make. She would gladly lay down her life to protect Takumi, so she asks if he can make a shield for her so she can protect him more efficiently. Takumi thinks that's a good idea, but he reminds Sofia that she should value her own life just as much as she values his life. Nolyn has been watching Takumi all this time and she's happy with all the progress he is making, because he is certainly going to need all the strength he can get to face his upcoming battles. 1 year in the future where the other heroes were summoned, we see Akira and Yamato after their training is complete. They are being sent on a mission by the King of Samandar, and I'm not gonna lie, they look pretty evil now. Back in Takumi's time, he has just finished working on the shield Sofia asked for, and although Sofia is the one who requested it, she feels bad after seeing how much it drains Takumi, so she wishes he had an assistant who could help him with his production. Meanwhile, over in the royal capital, the Lord receives a letter from Sidonia. It seems that they have heard about Takumi's toilets and the purification magic used in them, and although they don't know who Takumi is yet, they plan to take action against him. The story continues. Said action involves the church sending a messenger to meet with the King of Barcula. After learning about the toilets of purification magic that are used in Barcula, the Church of Divine Light issued an appeal to the Pope in Sidonia. As a result, they got the Pope to declare that purification magic is a gift from their god, and they want to be only ones who can use it, so they demand that the King of Barcula hand over the patent for the purification magic circles. And additionally, they demand that the king tell him who was behind the creation of these purification devices in the first place. The king listens to the church's demands, but seeing as those are some stupid demands, he is choosing to ignore them. The church's messenger is shocked that the king would dare to go against the church, so he threatens to order all the church priests in Barcula to return to Sidonia at once. However, the king isn't scared of that threat and in fact encourages him to do so. Takumi eventually hears about the king's decision, and he's glad the king didn't sell him out, but he's also a little worried about the king rejecting the Church of Divine Light so harshly. Sidonia's church is bound to turn against the kingdom of Barcula, and Takumi would hate it if such a big conflict were to start because of him, but Papek tells him there's nothing to worry about. After all, the Church of Divine Light isn't the only religion that exists in this world. There's the Church of Divine Light, and then there's the Church of Creation, but even though the Church of Divine Light's influence is far spread, there are still a lot of followers of the Church of Creation in this country, so the Church of Divine Light won't be missed. On top of that, the priests of the Church of Creation administer recovery magic to anyone in need, but the Church of Divine Light charges hefty fees for any holy magic. The Church of Divine Light is backed by Sidonia, so Takumi is probably going to have to avoid them from now on, but is what it is. Anyway, the reason Papek came to see Takumi today is because he presented Takumi's toilet and refrigerator to the king a while ago, and the king was so impressed that he asked Papek to bring Takumi to meet him. Takumi is a little wary of meeting someone as important as the king, but Papek assures him that the king isn't ordering him to do it, so he has the right to refuse if he wants, but Papek really wants him to agree, since it would help his company's relationship with the royal capital. Takumi eventually agrees to the meeting, so later that evening he tells Sofia and Maria about it and asks them if it would be willing to accompany him to the royal capital, Bakilatos. Both say they would love to go with Takumi, so he suggests that they depart a week from now, but in the meantime, there's a lot of stuff they need to get ready. A trip to the royal capital will take about 7 days, so Maria is going to need to pack a lot of food in advance. And while she does that, Takumi says he will be working on new cloaks for Maria and Sofia. He got some dark element magic stones from Papek, and if he uses those to make the cloaks that he can enchant them with a perception blocking spell. A spell like that would be really useful in combat, but the main reason Takumi wants to make it is so that when they make it to the royal capital, Sofia and Maria won't get harassed. Later on, Sofia and Maria head out to do some shopping, and while picking out some fruit, Maria complains that Takumi doesn't have enough confidence in himself. Sofia agrees and points out that Takumi has good looks, has an amazing talent for alchemy, and an incredible knack for invention. She continues listing off all of Takumi's good qualities, but Maria notices how enthusiastic Sofia is when she talks about Takumi, so she gets the feeling that Sofia might be in love with him. Sofia denies having such impure thoughts and says she only loves Takumi as her master, but Maria knows there's a love story in there somewhere. Meanwhile, Takumi is back at the church in town and kneels down in front of the statue of Nolyn to pray to her. Before long, light begins to shine down on Takumi, and he finds himself up in Nolyn's domain, where she warmly greets him. It's been a while since she last saw Takumi, and she heard about his invitation to the royal capital. So if he's here to pray for safe travels, then he should have brought an offering for her. Takumi tells her that he's just here because he has a few questions he wanted to ask her. The goddess that the Church of Divine Light worships is called Anat, so first he asks Nolyn if there's really another goddess besides her. Nolyn asserts that she is the only real goddess here, but if that's the case, then Takumi asks what Anat is meant to be. Nolyn doesn't want to reveal too much, so she says Takumi will find out about that when the time comes. While he's here, Takumi also asks Nolyn if she knows what's become of the other heroes that were summoned with him. It has been 10 months since Takumi got here, and normally something like heroes being summoned from another world would cause a huge commotion, but Takumi hasn't heard anyone talk about it. Nolyn comes clean and admits that when she summoned Takumi, she messed with time a little to send him 1 year into the past, so the heroes technically haven't been summoned yet. It'll be another couple of months before the heroes get summoned, but Takumi doesn't understand why she would go through all the trouble of sending him back in time, so he asks for an explanation. Unfortunately, Nolyn says his time's up, so she won't be answering any more questions for now, and she also asks him to bring her sweets as an offering next time he visits her. Takumi tries to tell her he has more questions to ask, but Nolyn chops him on the head, knocking him back down to the mortal world. Takumi later wakes up on the floor of the church and he gets the feeling that Nolyn was avoiding his questions about the other heroes, but he has no intention of getting involved with them in the first place, so it doesn't matter. He then heads back home to finish up those new cloaks he wanted to make for the girls, and once he's done, gives it to them. Both Maria and Sofia love the designs and Takumi is glad to hear it, but there's something else he wants to work on before their trip. He leads both of them to his workshop and shows them that he plans to make a carriage for himself. Since they've been traveling a lot recently, he feels like it would be more efficient to make a comfortable carriage for them to use, rather than having to borrow one every time. However, even if he can make his own carriage, he still doesn't have a horse, so he's going to need to borrow one from the guild. Maria tells him there's no need for that, since they can just get one of those too. The Forest of Death outside Bolton has a ton of monsters in it, and if they search long enough they'll probably find a unicorn or drake horse, which would be way faster than a regular monster horse. Maria seems really excited about going out to catch a horse, but Takumi can't help but feel a little nervous. They eventually head out in search of a horse, and while on their way into the forest, Takumi asks Sofia if drake horses are significantly faster than the monster horses they get from the guild. She confirms this and tells him that a drake horse possesses speed, stamina, and durability that far exceeds that of a regular monster horse. The drake horses look pretty much the same as regular horses, but they have a huge rhino horn and dragon scales along their body, so it should be pretty easy to spot if they come across one. Just then, Maple calls out to the three of them and says they should hurry up so they can find a horse already. Maple is clearly very motivated, but that's just because she's excited to get a new friend once Takumi forms a familiar contract with the horse. However, before the others could catch up to Maple, Sofia senses a monster nearby, so she readies her sword. But as a bush wolf jumps out of the bushes, it just runs past them instead of attacking. Takumi proudly states that the wolf didn't see them because of their anti-perception cloaks, but while Sofia is certainly impressed by the effectiveness of the cloaks, she thinks it might be a good idea to take them off so they can actually fight some monsters. A few moments after taking the cloak off, Sofia manages to slay a boar in a single blow. Maria thinks this is great since she can prepare the boar meat for them to use on their trip. Maple is getting impatient and tells everyone to hurry up already, but then Takumi notices a dead tree on the ground, and he could really use the wood since he's making a carriage, so he and Sofia get ready to begin cutting it up. Now Maria is busy with the meat and Takumi is busy with the tree, so Maple gives up on waiting for them and decides to go ahead by herself to find a horse. While making her way through the forest, Maple notices that there are a ton of dead tree in the area, so she wonders what could have done something like this. As she heads further into the forest, she eventually comes across a drake laying on the ground and it looks like it's in rough shape. Maple approaches it and asks if it's wounded. The drake immediately fires a lightning strike at Maple, so she backs away from it, but she can tell that it's just scared because it's injured and she understands the feeling since that was the same way she felt before Takumi found her. She tells the drake that it doesn't need to worry since her master is a really nice person, so he will heal it once he gets here. All they have to do is wait for a while, but doesn't look like they'll be able to wait in peace because two termite monsters suddenly show up and they don't look friendly. Maple realizes that the termites are the ones who hurt the drake, so she uses her webs to capture them and throws their bodies in front of the drake to be electrocuted, but there are a lot more termites, so they might be in trouble here. To protect herself and the drake, Maple weaves a barrier out of her silk, but while it may have bought her some time, the termites are eventually going to tear their way through. Maple tries calling for help from Takumi, but when she tries to establish a connection with him, he doesn't respond at all. She starts worrying that he may have gotten so excited about the wood he found that he forgot about her. Hopelessness sets in as the termites finally tear through her barrier, so Maple closes her eyes and awaits death. However, when she opens her eyes again, she finds Takumi standing over her, and he's so glad that she's alright. Maple jumps into his arms out of relief, and he actually came to save her because she was so worried when he didn't respond to her call, so Takumi explains that the cause was likely the barrier she put up. That was well made for blocking out attacks, but the interwoven layers also block out all Mana's signals so her call couldn't reach him. But as soon as Takumi realizes he had lost Maple's signal, he came running to her last known location. He then notices the drake behind Maple, and Maple asks him to save it, so he extends his hand and tries to use healing magic on it. However, the drake repels him since it doesn't trust Takumi. Sofia tells Takumi that they need to leave soon since there may be more termites in the area, but if they leave the drake out here on its own, it is bound to die, so Takumi decides to put it in his pocket dimension with Maple until they get home. Sofia warns him that he can't put such a high-level beast in his pocket dimension without forming a contract first because it will put tremendous strain on his body, but Takumi thinks he will be fine. As it turns out, Takumi was not fine. He passed out almost immediately after putting the drake in his pocket dimension, and even after the girls brought him home, he still hasn't woken up for the past 12 hours. The fact that the drake is still in his pocket dimension means Takumi's mana will continue to be sapped until he eventually withers away, and he can't open the barrier to let the drake out because he's unconscious, so Sofia gets in touch with Maple and asks her to open the pocket dimension from inside. Maple says she can do that, but the drake will be frightened if it suddenly appears in unfamiliar territory, so she says she'll make a tent out in the front yard to keep it calm. Once the drake is out of the pocket dimension, Takumi should be able to recover, so in the meantime, Maria heads out to buy some medical supplies to treat him and asks Sofia to stay by Takumi's side so he has someone next to him when he wakes up. Later that night, Takumi finally wakes up from his coma and heads outside to see the drake. Maple has been telling the drake all about Takumi while they waited for him to recover, and after introducing himself, Takumi asked it if it would be willing to form a contract with him. The drake trusts Maple, and since Maple is vouching for Takumi, it agrees to the contract. Now that Takumi has tamed the drake, he can finally use magic on it without having to worry about backlash, so he immediately casts High Heal on the drake to heal all its wounds. In the next moment, the drake is able to stand on its own again and is back to full strength. But now that she's officially one of Takumi's familiars, he has to come up with a name for it. Since he names Maple after a leaf, he decides to keep the theme and names the drake, Camellia, after the tree that retains its leaves all year round. Maple is glad that Camellia is all better now, and since everything has been settled, Maria calls everyone inside for dinner because she made a lot of tasty food and Takumi hasn't eaten in a full day because he was unconscious. The story continues. We see over in a slave trading company known as Palom, a beast girl named Reva is meeting with a prospective master. But while the client is indeed impressed with her aptitude for magic, he asks Reva if she knows how to use any practical magic spells. Reva says she doesn't know any useful spells yet, but she will try her hardest to learn so she can be useful to him. However, the man tells her he can't purchase her because he needs someone who can help him now, and he doesn't have time to wait for Reva to train. But he does acknowledge that she is quite unique, so he wishes her the best of luck in finding a master for herself. Once the client leaves, Reva apologizes to Palom for getting rejected yet again, but he tells her she doesn't need to worry herself because sooner or later the right master for her will turn up. Reva tries to remain hopeful, but it's been several years since she got here and she still hasn't managed to find anyone to be her master. She thinks back to her old life with her younger brother and how she was forced to sell herself off as a slave to make money and take care of her family. But despite all that, she hasn't managed to make a single cent yet. Over in Takumi's house, he is still working as hard as he can to finish his carriage, and it's starting to worry Maria. She asks Takumi if he plans to go back to Digambo's workshop today, and Takumi confirms it since there's a lot of blacksmithing work that needs to be done before the trip. Sofia tells him he might be overworking himself a little because on top of all the effort he's been putting in to finish the carriage, he still has to make more potions and refrigerators for Papek. Not to mention that Takumi hasn't taken a single break in the last few days, so at this rate she's worried he might work himself to death. Takumi appreciates that both of them are so concerned about his well-being, but he assures them that he is fine, so he heads out as planned. His first stop for the day is the guild, but as he enters, he hears a man desperately trying to get the guild master to believe him because he saw something horrific. Takumi walks up to the front desk and asks Hans what all the commotion is about, so Hans explains that there have been several reports of people seeing the strange creature outside. Takumi asks what kind of creature it is, but no one knows what it looks like, although Hans has drawn a sketch based on what the witnesses told him. Even with the sketch, it's still not clear what the creature is, but Hans isn't too worried about it since there haven't been any damage reports yet. Anyway, he asks Takumi what brings him to the guild today, so Takumi explains that he wants to register a new pet he just got. Hans is impressed that Takumi managed to tame another pet, and considering the stuff Takumi has done so far, he was already expecting it to be somewhat strange. But he is absolutely horrified when Takumi pulls Camilla out of his pocket dimension. Then he takes a look at his sketch and he realizes that Camilla is the monster that everyone has been so scared of. And now that they know Takumi was the cause of all the panic, the guildmaster pulls him into a meeting to scold him until he begs for mercy. Meanwhile, Sofia is out in town because she just got back from a meeting with Mulan. She was there to ask if Mulan had any slaves with magical abilities who could help Takumi with his work, but unfortunately she didn't have anyone who fit that description. Instead, Mulan suggested that Sofia could try taking a look at other slave trading companies to see if they have any slaves that fit the requirements she is looking for. As she is walking back home, she meets up with Maria, who is out shopping for ingredients to make lunch. She noticed how exhausted Takumi has been feeling lately, so she really wants to make him feel better with her cooking. But when she and Sofia head to Digambo's workshop to check on Takumi, they find him knocked out in a pile of wood. They are shocked at first, but Digambo tells them there's nothing to worry about since Takumi just fell asleep while he was working, and it's not hard to imagine why when Takumi has been working so hard without resting. And despite how exhausted he must have been, he kept working hard with a smile right up until the point he passed out. He's going to be fine for now, but Digambo warns the girls that if they don't get Takumi to stop working so hard, he might actually die one day. A little while later, once Takumi wakes up from his nap, he finishes the carriage and he looks so proud of himself for it. And he has every right to be proud too, because he broke the laws of physics to make this thing. It looks like a regular carriage on the outside, but on the inside it's the size of a house. Takumi put a lot of work into enchanting this carriage with spatial magic to make the inside bigger, and he even outfitted it with all the daily necessities, so even the longest road trips will feel comfy. Everyone hops in so they can take it out for a test ride, and Maria is having the time of her life driving it. Even though the carriage is moving at terrifying speeds, you can hardly feel any vibrations from the inside, so there's no risk of motion sickness. They've still got time before their scheduled trip, so Takumi tells Maria that she can make suggestions on anything she wants him to add to the carriage. And since he offered, she asks him for death spikes. Spikes on the side have no useful functionality whatsoever, but it'd be cool though. Takumi acknowledges Maria's suggestion and promptly ignores it, so they carry on as usual, and a few days later it is time for their trip. They pull up to the city gate and meet Lion's Fong there, since they'll be the ones escorting them on their journey to the capital. Papek and the others soon arrive as well, and since everyone is here, Takumi thinks it's time for them to get going. However, before they leave, Papek is a little curious about what a carriage built by Takumi would look like, so he asks if he can take a look inside. Takumi tells him to go right ahead, so Papek steps inside, and the second he sees the house inside, he freaks out. He frantically begins asking Takumi to tell him how he managed to make such a marvelous carriage and offers to pay him handsomely for the information, but he has some sense knocked into him by Lord Godwin because he doesn't want Papek to make Takumi uncomfortable. But then Godwin starts loudly exclaiming how he would love to have a carriage as wonderful as Takumi's, and while he's not ordering Takumi to make one for him, if Takumi were to give him one as a gift, he would be so thankful that he would be willing to pay 100 platinum coins. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that 100 platinum is roughly 1 billion yen. And with that kind of money on the table, how could he refuse? For now, the group sets out on their journey with Takumi and his party in his carriage, while Godwin and Papek use their own respective carriages. As they ride, Godwin talks to his assistant about how much of an asset Takumi has become for the kingdom ever since he showed up. He is sure Takumi will eventually reach even greater heights, but all his accomplishments are bound to draw unwanted attention. And while the king and Godwin will do everything they can to shield Takumi from threats within the kingdom of Barcula, the empire of Sidonia will still be very difficult to deal with. Speaking of the empire of Sidonia, we take a look into the future after the other heroes were summoned and Akane is reading an old Sidonian history book to gather as much information as she can. The book talks about the goddess Anat that Sidonia worships, and it says she created humanity in her likeness. Then she created beastmen from beasts and elves from sprites, all to serve under mankind. That is why beastmen in the empire of Sidonia are treated so poorly and Akane can't stand it. Back to Takumi's time, he and the others have just arrived at the capital, and Takumi is happy they managed to make it here safely without being attacked. But the only reason for that was because Takumi's party kept wiping out all the monsters that got even slightly close to them. In fact, Lion's Fawn literally did nothing the entire time, even though they are meant to be the bodyguards here. Just then, Papek approaches Takumi and says he has something to talk to him about, so once they reach the inn, he tells Takumi that he wants to give the king a carriage similar to the one Takumi made for himself. He already talked this over with Lord Godwin, and he thinks this would be the perfect way to demonstrate Takumi's expertise to the king, although since their audience with the king is only 5 days away. Papek doesn't think Takumi will be able to make one in time, so he suggests they wait until the next time they have an audience with the king. However, Takumi surprisingly says he can do it within the 5 days. If he made it after getting home, then he would have to transport the carriage all the way back to the capital, and that's way too much work, so he thinks it would be better to just make it while he's already here. It shouldn't be too hard to find the necessary materials in the capital, but the main problem is that Takumi needs somewhere to begin building and he doesn't have a workshop in the capital. Thankfully, Papek says he knows the perfect place for Takumi to do all his work, the Palm Company. Takumi later meets with Maria and Sofia to tell them about Papek's proposition for him to work at the Palm Company, and Sofia happens to know a bit about the Palm Company. So she tells Takumi it's one of the more trustworthy slave trading companies in the capital, at least according to what Mulan told her. Papek got permission for Takumi to use one of the Palm Company's old detached buildings, so as soon as the materials arrive, Takumi intends to begin working on the new carriage. However, Sofia refuses to let that happen, so she tells Takumi that he needs to get himself an assistant. He nearly worked himself to death building the first carriage, and now he wants to start working on a second one without stopping to take a break. Even a workaholic like him has to realize that he is being reckless with his health, so Sofia asks him to get himself another slave while they are at the Palm Company. Takumi understands that Sofia and Maria are genuinely worried for his well-being, so he agrees to get a new slave, and the next day he meets with the owner of the Palm Company. Takumi tells him that he is looking for a slave to help him with his alchemy, and since Takumi is currently working on a carriage that has various magical elements, Palm assumes Takumi would need a slave who has magical aptitude. While Takumi is having his meeting, Sofia is standing outside, but all of a sudden Maria comes running up to her in a panic because she can't find Maple anywhere. Maple said something about wanting to explore the Palm building earlier, and if anyone sees a killer spider roaming the halls, they are going to freak out, so Sofia says she's going to go look for Maple before she caused any trouble. Unfortunately, by the time she finds Maple, she has already scared the soul out of Reva, who is just trying to enjoy her book. Maple apologizes for scaring Reva, and Sofia helps her back to her feet, but as she does so, she notices that the book Reva is carrying is a book about alchemy. She asks Reva if she's interested in alchemy, and she begins telling her about how much she loves studying alchemy. A few minutes later, Reva is brought into the meeting room to meet with Takumi, since Palm suggested her as a good candidate for Takumi's needs. Reva greets Takumi and takes his seat so they can begin their discussion. But as Takumi is telling her about the tasks he needs completed, Reva is completely zoned out because she's worried she will get rejected again and won't get to make any money for her family. Just then, Takumi mentions something about meeting someone who is somewhat knowledgeable in alchemy, and as soon as Reva hears the word alchemy, she shoots up because alchemy is her thing. She loves alchemy just as much as Takumi does, so the two start talking about their favorite methods and theories, and Takumi is so impressed by her that he decides to give Reva a little quiz. He tears a piece of paper out from one of his journals and asks her if she can figure out what this magic circle is for. Reva takes one look at it, and she can tell that it's a recomposition circle used to make sweets, but there's something off about it and she doesn't know what it is. She starts having an exam-induced panic attack and starts crying because she can't answer Takumi's question. She tells him she doesn't know the answer because this isn't the same candy spell she knows, and she was fully expecting Takumi to reject her for failing his test, but on the contrary, he extends his hand and invites her to join his party. She was actually right about the circle being used to make candy, but it was slightly different because Takumi uses different ingredients in his candy. Nevertheless, Takumi thinks it's amazing that she was able to figure out what the magic circle was just by looking at it, so he tells her he would love to have her as a part of his team. Since Takumi has accepted Reiva, Palom creates the contract between them, and Reiva is glad to finally be employed, but she asks him if he can do a small favor for her. She wants him to help her send all her wages back to her home village. Reiva explains that her family is very poor, so she wants to support them as much as possible so her brother can have a better life. And if that's what she really wants, then Takumi sees no reason to refuse. Meanwhile, the king of Sidonia is getting ready to retaliate against the kingdom of Barcula for refusing to hand Takumi over, so the king plans to send out the holy knights to make an example of them, but the princess has a better idea. They will soon be summoning their heroes, so she plans to start rumors to build hatred for the people of Barcula among Sidonia. And once they had summoned their heroes, they will find an excuse to wage war and get their revenge. The story continues. We see a little while later, Takumi finishes synthesizing the adamantite framework for the carriage, and Reiva is amazed that he was able to create something like this on his own. She offers to begin polishing the frame, but as she does so, her mood plummets because she doesn't think she could achieve something like this, but Takumi assures her that while the alchemy circles he used may look complicated, it isn't that much harder than the candy spell. He is sure that after a little training, Reiva will be able to perform alchemy just as well as him, because after all she has the most valuable trait for alchemy, genuine excitement for the craft. Eventually, with Reiva's help, Takumi is able to finish the carriage, and while he is admiring his work, an old man walks up next to him to look at the carriage as well. He asks Takumi if this belongs to him, but Takumi responds saying he made it, but he's actually going to be giving this one to the king. Just then, the others come running over while yelling to get the king's attention, and since they definitely are referring to Takumi, Takumi realizes that the man standing next to him must be the king, and he is mortified by how casually he was speaking with him earlier. The king tells him he doesn't have to worry about formalities since this is an informal meeting, and the reason he chose to have this informal meeting is because he thinks formal meetings are boring. He also wanted to meet the famous alchemist as soon as possible so he could thank him in person, but Takumi is surprised to hear that the king wants to thank him. He's not sure what he could have done to warrant thanks from the king, but the king reminds him that he invented the toilets that solved the kingdom's sewage problem. So as the king, it is his duty to show his gratitude. Normally a grand banquet would be held in Takumi's honor, and all sorts of rewards and titles would be given to him, but that would draw too much unwanted attention to him, and the king knows Takumi wants to remain anonymous to avoid being targeted by Sidonia. The king seems like a really good guy, and Takumi is grateful that he is so understanding. The king ended up giving Takumi a reward for his toilet invention, and afterwards the group began their journey home. As they leave, the king watches from his window and he instructs his attendants to make sure no one ever knows that Takumi came here today. Simon agrees to tell everyone in the castle to keep their mouths shut about Takumi, but once they start exporting Takumi's goods outside Barcula, Takumi's influence is going to spread so far that it's going to be impossible to stop Sidonia from acting against him. After returning to Bolton, Takumi sits down with all his slaves to discuss their wages. But to be shocked, Maria and Sofia say they don't want to get paid. Maria says he already gives her plenty of food, so she's happy with the allowance he already provides, and Sofia doesn't have much use for his salary anyway, so she doesn't see a need to get paid. Reiva thinks it's weird that Takumi has to argue to convince these two to accept their salary, but she's just enjoying the show at this point. Takumi tries to explain to Sofia that even if she doesn't need the money right now, it's still a good idea to save it for the future, but Sofia's mind is made up. She's an elf, so she's guaranteed to live more than Takumi. But even after Takumi dies, she intends to spend the rest of her life watching over his grave. Maria isn't going to live as long, but she would gladly do the same. The sentiment is nice, but Takumi really wishes these two could come up with a future plan for themselves that doesn't involve sitting by his grave for all eternity. Meanwhile, over in the Empire of Sidonia, one of the princess's spies has managed to get their hands on one of Takumi's purification devices, and she is disgusted that someone would dare to replicate holy magic instead of paying them. Princess refuses to let this stand, and she knows that these purification devices originated from the city of Bolton, so she intends to send a small unit to destroy whoever is producing the devices. Back at Takumi's house, he and Reiva are in his workshop when Reiva suddenly asks him if she can register at the Adventurers Guild. Takumi is surprised by her request, but Reiva says she wants to help Takumi as an adventurer as well, just like Maria and Sofia. Also, being an adventurer would help her improve her stats, and improving her stats will allow her to do more complex alchemy. When she puts it like that, Takumi can see why she wants to become an adventurer, so he agrees to let her register. The two of them head to the guild, and Reva gets a guild card issued to her so she can join Takumi's party. But on the topic of Takumi's party, Hans tells him to hurry up and come up with a name already. With the exception of Reva, everyone in Takumi's party is already D rank, and with their performance they are easily one of the guild's top parties, so they can't stay nameless forever. Takumi doesn't think it's that much of an issue if he leaves his party nameless since he never wanted to be an adventurer to begin with. In the first place, his team doesn't have someone to fight on the front lines. Takumi could probably do it if he had a little more training, but he's not really interested in getting stronger. Just then, Barak shows up out of nowhere and says he is willing to train Takumi until he's the best frontliner out here, and he conveniently chooses to ignore Takumi when he says he isn't interested in any training. Barak proceeds to throw Takumi all across the training grounds while demanding that he think of a name for his party. But between the fear and constant pain, he only names Takumi can come up with are toilet-related, so Barak keeps throwing him around until he can think of something better. Unfortunately, Takumi couldn't think of anything, so by the end of the day he is covered in bruises and bumps. Maria starts patching him up, so Takumi asks if she has an idea for a party name, but she's even worse at naming things than he is, so she's not going to be much help. Takumi tries asking Sofia if she can think of a good party name, but her mind is a little preoccupied by the blind fury building within her. She can't believe Barak would dare to hurt her master in such a way, and she gets up to head over to the guild right now because she's ready to throw hands over this. However, Takumi stops her and says Barak was just training him, and as much as it hurt, Takumi's combat stats did go up quite a bit because of it, so there's no reason to be mad at Barak. 10 months have passed since Takumi got summoned, and the other heroes are currently busy with their training. Yamato's combat prowess has been steadily improving over time, so much so that he is now overpowering the knight in charge of training him. However, Akira sits on the sidelines and mocks Yamato because he thinks Yamato's aggressive fighting style would never work in real combat. Akane reminds Akira that his fighting style is just as aggressive as Yamato's, but Akira says he's the main character, so he is naturally a better swordsman. Anyway, he asks if Akane wants to come back to his room with him for a different kind of training, but Akane ignores him and turns to head back to her room. Ever since they got here, Yamato and Akira seem to have changed for the worse, and she doesn't know why. She has been trying to figure out as much as possible about Sidonia and its goddess Anat to figure out what's going on, but so far all she's found is the doctrine of the Church of Divine Light. Their doctrine preaches absolute human supremacy and treats all demi-humans as slaves. But on the other hand, she managed to learn a bit about the Church of Creation that worships Nolyn, and it treats all humans and demi-humans equally. However, Sidonia is dominated by the Church of Divine Light, and if they summon her and the others as heroes to bring world peace, that kind of shudders to think about what the royal family here intends to have them do. Back to Takumi gives Reva a ring and a staff since she wants to help out with their adventuring. The ring will help her activate magic, and since Reva told him she knows how to use his staff, Takumi made one out of Trayant wood and some mithril alloy. Reva is really thankful that Takumi made such wonderful weapons for her, but Maple is starting to get jealous because Takumi never makes weapons for her. However, Takumi did make a weapon for her this time, and he had Reva help him make it, so Maple is thankful to both of them. The next day, Takumi is training with Barak again, and he tries to come up with a name for his party so he can get out of training. But the best he's got is Cat's Claw, and that's just a rip-off of Lion's Fang, so Barak puts him in an abdominal stretch hold. Maria tries to help by suggesting a name, but it's so bad that Barak rejects it and tosses Takumi to the ground. Takumi is getting worried that Sofia might attack Barak if he keeps swinging him around like this, but after seeing the training for herself, Sofia realizes that Takumi is really weak in hand-to-hand combat, so she now thinks the training is necessary. After several hours of being thrown around, Takumi finally gets a break, but just as he's finally getting to relax, Hans asks him if he would like to take on an escort mission. Takumi is hesitant to accept escort missions since they are usually really long, but Barak tells him that with his carriage and Camellia, it would only take him 4 days to get there and back. Plus, the request is coming from Papek's company, so he'd be doing Papek a favor if he accepts. Takumi asks if Lion's Fang can do it instead, since they usually handle Papek's escort quests, but unfortunately, Lion's Fang is currently out on a separate mission, so they can't do it. Takumi still doesn't want to accept the quest, but everyone else seems to think it'll be a good idea, so he's forced to accept. They begin their journey to the town of Kilgus, and the man they're escorting says he feels a lot more secure knowing that Takumi and his party will be protecting him. He plans to sell some basic necessities as well as the purification devices, but while he's there, Papek also asked him to buy some milk. Takumi is shocked to learn that milk exists in this world since he's never seen any, but it just usually isn't sold in Bolton. Kilgus also has other dairy products like cheese as well, so Takumi is starting to get excited about this trip after all. Once they arrive at the town of Kilgus, Takumi has everyone try cream stew for the first time. As they take their first bite, they all think it's really tasty and unique since they've never tasted anything like it before. But Takumi thinks he could improve this recipe a little, so he says they should buy a lot of cheese and milk before they return home. Luckily, the markets in this town stay open at night, so Takumi can buy as much as he wants right now. That night, they all head out to buy the dairy products, and afterwards they all sit down together to taste them. Being able to have milk and cheese again has Takumi thinking about his old life in Japan, but he doesn't miss it at all because his life in this world is much more fulfilling than it ever was on Earth. Sofia notices that Takumi is deep in thought, so she asks him if something happened, and he asks her if she ever thinks about returning to her hometown. Sofia says she prefers her current life too much to continue dwelling on the past. She spent 50 years of her life trapped by the curse that had been placed on her. But after forming a contract with Takumi, she was able to live a new life, so all she cares about now is moving forward with Takumi and the others. Everyone else agrees with Sofia's sentiment, and Takumi understands how they feel, since ever since coming to this world, it feels like he has been given wings to live his life as he pleases. And now that he thinks about it, those metaphorical wings are all thanks to Nolyn, so he has finally decided on a name for his party, the Wings of Nolyn. After completing the escort mission, Takumi and the others return to Bolton. But upon arriving at his mansion, he realizes something is wrong. The entire room is full of paralysis poison, and before he even realizes what's going on, the girls have all been poisoned and captured by two masked men. One of them approaches Takumi and attempts to stab him to death, but at the last second the knife gets knocked out of his hand by a web, so Takumi seizes the opportunity to counterattack and knocks the first guy out. The second guy then tries to attack Takumi, but he is easily able to flip him over and knock him out as well. Now that the threats have been neutralized, Takumi thanks Maple for the assist, since she really saved him back there. He then uses Cure to get rid of the poison so the girls can move again, and Sofia begins profusely apologizing for not being able to protect him. Takumi tells her it's not her fault she couldn't move, since only he and Maple have paralysis-resistant skills. But speaking of Maple, she asks Takumi what he wants to do with the rest of the intruders she found. She found these guys lurking around the house, so she defeated them and tied them up in her webs, but by the looks of it, this was a planned assassination attempt. Takumi sends Sofia to go get Barak from the guild, and after arriving, he has the assassins taken away. But he tells Takumi that he should probably report this to the Lord of Bolton, because it looks like Sidonia finally found him. The story continues. We see Takumi later has a meeting with the Lord, and his investigation revealed that the people who tried to attack him were members of the Divine Light Squadron. They are basically a task force that Sidonia sends out to execute anyone whom they deem to be problematic for the Church of Divine Light. Takumi is horrified that Sidonia is really trying to kill him. He is informed that the reason Sidonia is after his head is because of the purification devices he created. Previously, the kingdom had to rely on priests to use holy magic to purify the sewers. The priests of the Church of Creation and the Church of Divine Light used to take turns doing it, and while the Church of Creation did it for free, the Church of Divine Light always charged large fees. But now, with Takumi's invention, priests aren't needed for purification anymore, so Takumi pretty much cost the Church of Divine Light a huge portion of their revenue. Takumi asked if he needs to go into hiding or maybe leave the nation, but he is told that he will be safest if he remains here in Bolton, since this nation has many followers of the Church of Creation, so it will be hard for the Church of Divine Light to exert their influence here. And as an extra precaution, they are going to increase the number of patrols for the Knights and City Guard to prevent more Divine Light assassins from showing up. That takes care of the city's security, but Barak says they still need to worry about Takumi's safety while he's out on adventuring missions. Takumi turns to him and says he actually intends to suspend his adventuring for now, given the circumstances, but Barak refuses to accept that. Takumi's party is one of the top 5 in the guild, so it would hurt the guild's metrics if he stopped adventuring, and the guild's metrics are way more important to Barak than Takumi's life being in danger. Sofia adds to this, saying she will protect Takumi even if it costs her life, so she wants to keep adventuring with him. Takumi is too much of a pushover to refuse either of them, so he ends up agreeing to continue being an adventurer. But as the three of them head back to the guild, Takumi takes a moment to think. It is clear that Sidonia is after his life, but because of him, his friends were put in danger last night and he needs to do something if he's going to keep them safe. Once they get to the guild, Takumi and Sofia meet with Hans so they can finally register their party name, but before they leave, Hans warns Takumi that he needs to be careful. Rumors about the attack on him have already begun to spread, and there are also rumors that a huge bounty has been placed on Takumi's head, so there's a chance that some of the adventurers here might try to attack him. Later that night, Takumi returns home and tells everyone the bad news. Maria is upset after hearing everything because it means there's a high chance that more people will attack them again. Takumi apologizes to all of them since they are in danger because of him, but they tell him there's no need to be sorry because they all chose to stick by his side no matter what. Besides, they are strong enough to handle anyone who tries to attack them again. Takumi is glad he has the girls to support him, but he's still a little worried, so he has been thinking of creating a magical device to raise a barrier around his house. That way, no attackers would ever be able to get close to him or the girls while they are at home, but he still needs to worry about their safety while they are out on adventures, so Sofia suggests he should find someone to act as their party's tank. Takumi agrees, but he has no idea where to start looking for one, so Sofia tells him that there are a lot of adventurers who are solo, so they could probably find someone in no time. But there's no guarantee that they'd be trustworthy, so Takumi intends to go looking for another slave instead. Everyone goes to bed for the night while the knights stand guard outside the mansion, but Takumi stays up all night working on his barrier device. The next morning, he calls Reva outside to help him with the alchemy, but surprisingly, Sofia comes over as well and says she wants to help. Takumi is happy to have an extra set of hands, so he agrees to let Sofia help and asks her to etch this magic circle into one of the metal plates he brought out. Once that's done, Takumi begins pouring some magic powder on the metal sheet, and while he does this, Sofia asks him if he managed to get any sleep last night. Takumi admits that he stayed up all night because he was thinking about defensive measures for the future, and speaking of defensive measures, it looks like Maple is training with Camellia. They are practicing Camelia's ram attacks against some fake golems. But now that Reva thinks about it, golems fall under alchemy, so if Takumi were able to make one, it would be perfect to act as their party's tank. Unfortunately, golems require magic circles to be engraved into their control core, and that's still too complex for Takumi to do, so he can't try making one. He would need his mana manipulation skill to level up a lot for him to even attempt it, but for now he just wants to focus on finishing up the barrier, so he begins casting a spell to bind the spell to the metal plates, and once he's done, all that's left is to place them on the house. All of a sudden, Takumi gets a notification that his mana manipulation skill has been maxed out and evolved into spell control, so maybe he can attempt the golem creation after all. Meanwhile, in Sidonia, the king has just been informed that the Divine Light Squadron was captured. The king is shocked to hear that not only did the Divine Squadron fail to kill their target, but they were also captured. By now, the kingdom of Barcula must have interrogated the assassins and found out that Sidonia was behind it, so this matter has become a lot more troublesome than he had anticipated. Elizabeth suggests to the king that they should put a hold on any further attacks on Barcula for now, and instead focus on completing their other mission regarding the summoning circle. The king thinks she's right, so he asks Homer for a progress report on the ruined magic circles they found. Homer replies, telling the king that he was unable to analyze the circle completely, but it seems to be functional regardless, so they just need to wait for it to accumulate enough magic power to be activated, meaning it should take about 2 months before they can finally summon their heroes. Back at Takumi's house, he has just finished his first attempt at a golem and it was a total failure. Creating multi-layered magic circles for the core is a lot harder than he thought it would be, so he's probably going to have to level up even more before he can handle it. Maple asks him why he even wants to make a golem in the first place because he already has all of them and they are really strong, but Takumi thinks it would be nice to have a golem to guard the house at all times, even when they go on adventures together. If that's the case, Maple asks why he doesn't just go find a natural golem and tame it. And that's actually a brilliant idea, so Takumi immediately starts making plans to do exactly that. He asks Sofia if there are any good locations to find golems, so she tells him that around the Forest of Death, there have been reports of occasional stone golems being sighted, and if you go into the dungeon, there's a chance you might even find an iron golem inside. Takumi is surprised to learn that this world has dungeons, but Sofia is confused about how Takumi could possibly not know about the dungeons. Takumi makes up an excuse and says he hasn't been inside a dungeon before, but he thinks they should try heading into the dungeon to try finding an iron golem. But Sofia tells him that would be a bad idea, because it would be reckless to try to take on the dungeon when they don't have a tank in their team yet. Sofia makes a good point, so Takumi and the others end up heading to the rock flats in search of a rock golem. Eventually they manage to spot one, but it's way bigger than they thought it would be. Sofia informs everyone that the golem they are faced with is probably guardian class, and to kill it they would need to target its magic stone, but Takumi doesn't want to kill it. Just then, the golem turns in their direction and starts scanning the area, so Sofia and Takumi duck behind a rock to hide from it. Sofia didn't expect the golem to have a scan ability, and she's starting to worry that it may be too much for them to handle, so she suggests that they should look for a different golem to tame. However, Takumi still thinks this is the best golem, since having a dangerous golem like that guarding his house would deter most attackers. He doesn't waste another minute and immediately runs out to challenge the golem, but just as everyone gets into position and is about to fire, Takumi suddenly realizes that the golem isn't attacking him, so he tells everyone to wait while he tests something out. Truth be told, he is terrified to be so close to the golem, but for some reason he feels energy similar to that of Nolyn's coming off it, so he assumes it must have been created to guard some of Nolyn's ancient ruins. And if that's the case, then Takumi thinks the blessing Nolyn gave him should be enough to make it friendly. He stretches out his arm and attempts to tame the golem and actually works out. He has successfully tamed the golem, and he did it without having to fight at all, so the girls are really impressed. Maple asks Takumi what he plans to name the golem now that he has tamed it, so Takumi thinks about it for a second and eventually comes up with the name Titan. Everyone greets Titan and welcomes him to their team, and it seems like Titan is trying to tell them something, but his body isn't very versatile, so Takumi intends to make him a new one. He tells everyone that they can head home now, but Sofia points out that they will cause a huge commotion if they return with a giant golem out of the blue. Takumi realizes that might be an issue, so he's about to put Titan in his pocket dimension, but before he could do so, Titan begins to crumble and shrinks himself down to a little rock golem. Now they can take him with them to town without causing a huge scene, and Takumi promises to get to work on some improvements for Titan as soon as possible. Meanwhile, in the future, Akane continues to watch as her friends become more powerful and scummy with each passing day. The two of them are now strong enough to take out the entire knight squad of the castle, and they are taking great joy in calling all the knights weak as they stand over them. Back to Takumi, as soon as he got home, he got right to work designing a new body for Titan, and he's really excited for it. So he plans to begin construction soon, but before that, there's something he needs to take care of. He calls a meeting with everyone and tells them he is planning to dissolve all the contracts he has with them. The girls are shocked to hear this and ask Takumi why, so he explains that they will always be in danger if they stick around him and he doesn't want to let them get hurt. He's been considering this ever since the day they first got attacked, and he is sure that this is for the best. The girls ask who will protect him if they aren't around, but Takumi says he still has Titan with him, as well as Maple and Camellia, so they don't have to worry about him. He wants the three of them to live somewhere safe, and of course he's going to pay them a lump sum so they can afford to live comfortably for a while. He tells them to think of it as his final gift to them, but all of a sudden Maria gets up from her seat and points her spear at him. She simply can't accept Takumi's decision and asks why he always prioritizes others over himself. Takumi tells her he doesn't want to be the reason any of them gets hurt, so as much as he loves them, he can't have them stay with him any longer. Maria yells that if Takumi truly cares about them, that he should want them to fight by his side and overcome whenever challenge comes their way together, but Takumi remains silent because he doesn't know what to say. Maria breaks down in tears and apologizes for threatening Takumi, but she doesn't know what to do with herself if she's not by Takumi's side. Sofia goes to comfort Maria and tells Takumi that while she understands that he is only asking them to leave out of concern for their safety, but telling them to just abandon him after everything they've been through is simply too cruel, they all swore to serve Takumi with everything they've got, and they were serious about remaining loyal to him forever. Takumi finally gets it, so he apologizes to everyone for trying to push his decision on them without considering how they feel. He asks them one last time if they really want to stay by his side, despite all the dangers they may face, and the girls tell him they'll be by his side no matter what comes their way. Now that they've sorted that out, Takumi resumes work on Titan's body, and he's super shiny now. Titan absolutely loves his new body, and why wouldn't he? He has an adamantite skeleton with mithril armor, as well as every weapon Takumi could fit in there. And best of all, Takumi made a giant body for the little Titan to go in, so Takumi has finally achieved a lifelong dream of creating a real Gundam, and he couldn't be happier. Meanwhile, Nolyn is watching Takumi from heaven, probably jealous of his giant mech, but she is suddenly approached by one of her subordinates, and she has bad news. There are signs that Anat is starting to come into existence. The god that the Church of Divine Light worships didn't exist before, but after years of worship, their collective will has given birth to Anat. And unfortunately, because their will is so rotten, Anat is on the verge of becoming an evil spirit. On top of that, since Sidonia was the country responsible for summoning the heroes, it's possible that they will start a war once those heroes are strong enough. Nolyn was already aware of this, but she can't directly interfere with the mortal realm. That is why she placed Takumi in this world and granted him so many blessings. And from now on, the fate of this world rests on Takumi's shoulders. The story continues. We see there was a group of villagers who were forced to abandon their homes after a bunch of nobles made the place completely unlivable. This has led to all the villagers hating all forms of nobility, especially Máni, who lost her husband because of the careless actions of the nobles. A year after that incident, the Lord is reviewing the report on it, and apparently those refugees were taken in by a noble named Rockford, but he can't support all 1,000 refugees any longer, so he is asking them to help find a new home for them. However, with 1,000 people, there's only one piece of land big enough to accommodate them, and it's currently overrun by monsters. Developing that area is going to be practically impossible, so the Lord has no choice but to ask Takumi for help. Meanwhile, Takumi and the others are getting ready to go dungeon exploring. Takumi has been interested in dungeons for a while now, so he chose to enter a dungeon known as the Forest of the Beast King. It is the second most difficult in the kingdom, and despite being underground, it really does look like a forest. The monsters here are a lot stronger than the monsters on the surface are, but Maple, as the scout and Titan taking all the big hits for them, they were able to defeat the floor bosses fairly easily and claim the treasure chests. It took a whole day before they could reach the last floor, and as they approach the final boss room, everyone is getting excited. Sofia is just glad that they managed to make it this far without suffering any real damage, and Takumi says it's because they got lucky and didn't fall for any traps. But just as he says this, he accidentally steps on a trap in the floor, sending a massive boulder right at them. Takumi yells for everyone to retreat, so they all start running until they make it to a room that's too small for the boulder to get in. All of a sudden, the door they came in through closes behind them, so now they have no choice but to follow this path. Eventually they arrive at a large room and Takumi is starting to get the feeling that they were lured here, and it turns out that he was right because the final boss soon appears, and it's an S-rank rock dragon. Takumi really wishes he had brought the giant Titan mech with him, but he didn't, so as the dragon strikes at them, Takumi tells everyone to run. They won't have a chance to attack if they don't stop the dragon's tail from moving, so Takumi asks Titan and Maple to try and pin it down for a few seconds. Titan understands, so he grabs the dragon's tail to hold it in place, while Maple uses her webs to stick it to the ground. And with the dragon's tail trapped, Sofia runs up to it and starts stabbing. The dragon screams out in pain, so everyone uses the opportunity to hit it with all the magic they've got, but it's still not enough to bring it down. Sofia tells Takumi that the dragon's weak point is its midsection, so Takumi brings Camellia out and has her charge straight from the dragon's abdomen. This does a considerable amount of damage, so Takumi seizes the opportunity to go in for the final blow. He runs up to the dragon, intending to strike it down, but then he realizes that he doesn't want to get too close to that fire breath, so he realizes there's an easier way to deal with this thing. He enchants his sword with magic before throwing it in the dragon's mouth. This does enough damage to finish the dragon off, so it disappears, leaving behind a treasure chest in its place. This means they've officially cleared the dungeon, and as a bonus, Takumi found this dragon scale thing and he's sure he can make something great out of it. After Takumi and his party return to Bolton, Takumi is immediately summoned by Marcus Godwin. Once he arrives at the Marcus mansion, Godwin asks him if he is familiar with the uninhabited land to the south of this region. Takumi recalls hearing that the place is undeveloped and there are so many monsters there that even the neighboring nations don't want to bother dealing with it. The kingdom of Triaria once tried to invade that area, but they failed miserably and suffered great losses as a result. With that said, he wants Takumi to go there and build a village. Takumi is dumbfounded and asks why Godwin wants him of all people to do it, so Godwin tells Takumi that he heard of the board village and how Takumi built a huge wall for them in the span of a few minutes. That's why he believes Takumi will be able to construct a village on his own. There's a river about 100 kilometers to the south of Bolton, so they tell Takumi it would be a good place to start construction, but Sofia doesn't like the way Godwin is trying to dump this responsibility on Takumi's shoulders, so she reminds him that Takumi's life is still under threat from Sidonia. Godwin is aware of this, and he tells her that he normally wouldn't make such a request, but the circumstances are very dire. A year ago, development on a pioneer village was halted due to interference from corrupt nobles, and as a result, 1,000 villagers were forced to abandon their homes. The refugees have been supported by Bolton and Rockford till now, but Godwin would like to find a new home for them as soon as possible. That's all Takumi needed to hear because he says he will do it. Sofia tries to convince him to reconsider since it would be extremely dangerous, but Takumi has already made up his mind because he can't ignore people who are in need of help. When he first got here, he didn't have a home either, but the people of the Board Village took him in and gave him a place to live. That's why he wants to do the same for these refugees. Since Takumi agreed to build the village, he immediately sets out with his party and an escort of knights so he can start construction. After building the roads, Takumi used his magic to erect a giant rock wall and dug out a huge moat in front of it to stop monsters from attacking the village. He then had Reva reinforce the wall to make it stronger, and Maria helped with some of the inner city roads. After a few days of work, this place is finally starting to look like a real village, so Takumi asks Sofia to return to Bolton and tell Godwin that he can send the pioneers here. Sofia does, as she is told, and rushes back to Bolton on Camellia to inform Godwin that they are ready to receive the refugees, but Godwin can't believe that they managed to create a whole village in just 10 days. The village isn't exactly perfect, but Takumi said it should be good enough for the villagers to live their daily lives without issue, so Godwin gives the order for the refugees to head to the new village. The refugees start heading there under escort of the knights, but even though they are supposedly receiving a new home, they are rather worried because they are heading for the southern frontier, and the place is known for being undeveloped monster territory. They heard that a man was dispatched to make the land habitable, but they assume it is just another rotten noble who sees them as nothing but disposable pawns, so the living conditions in the village must be terrible. However, as they pull up to the village, the knight captain is shocked by the sheer magnitude of the village walls. It's practically a fortress at this point. The convoy crosses the drawbridge and enters the village where they meet Takumi. The knight captain asks Takumi what all this is, so Takumi explains that he's surrounded the village with ramparts and Dudamote for security. This way, as long as the village isn't attacked by a dragon or something with wings, it should be safe. There's also a castle on that hill over there, but Takumi just made that in case any officials came to visit the village. There are homes for everyone who is moving in, as well as some barracks for the knights, and Takumi even created a sewage system complete with his purification devices. The knight thanks Takumi for all this hard work, but that aside, he asks how on earth it was possible for Takumi to do all of this in such a short amount of time. All he was asked to do was make a village, but this place is practically a fortress. The villagers were skeptical before, but now that they've seen the village, they are actually grateful that they get to live here, but Máni still doesn't seem so happy. Sofia notices Máni on the hill looking gloomy, so she decides to go talk to her and ask if she's here alone. Máni tells her that her husband died in her old village, so Sofia offers her condolences. It would probably be difficult for Máni to attend to the fields by herself, so Sofia asks her if she would be interested in a different kind of work. She tells Máni that her master is the one who built this village and has been very busy lately, so she's looking for someone to help take care of his needs. Sofia's phrasing makes it sound a bit inappropriate, so she clarifies that Takumi just needs someone to do the cooking and cleaning since Maria is busy with construction too. She invites Máni to meet with Takumi, so a little while later they gather in Takumi's house to discuss the details. Takumi tells her that as long as she's okay with it, he would like to ask her to help take care of them. Of course, he says you will pay her a fair wage, but Máni remembers everything that happened at the old village and how she vowed never to trust another noble again. She declines Takumi's offer and tells him that she simply doesn't trust him. Things may look good now, but she is sure that sooner or later, Takumi will cause the villagers to experience great despair, just like the other nobles did. Maria tries to convince Máni that Takumi isn't like that, but if Máni doesn't want to take the job, Takumi doesn't intend to bother her any longer. Máni then leaves Takumi's room, and as she is walking away, she thinks to herself that she might have messed up by speaking to Takumi like that. Regardless of whether he is trustworthy or not, he did build this village, so now that she has disrespected him, there's no way he would allow her to stay in his village, so she starts leaving. However, as she heads out into the forest, she encounters a massive horde of monsters, so she's starting to regret her choice to leave the village. Back in the village, Maple tells Takumi that she senses a huge horde of monsters approaching the village, and there are a lot of them. The villagers hear about the monsters and start getting worried that they are going to die here, but Takumi refuses to let that happen. He approaches the knight captain and tells him to raise all the drawbridges so none of the monsters can get into the city. From what Maple told him, there aren't any flying monsters nearby, so the villagers should be safe inside while Takumi and the others deal with the monsters. Meanwhile, outside, Máni is sprinting back to the city to get away from the monster, but to her dismay, she sees that they have already raised the drawbridge, so there's no way for her to get to safety now. The villagers inside realize that they haven't seen Máni in a while, and now that they mention it, the knight captain recalls seeing Máni leave the city gates a while ago, so it's possible she might still be outside, and if that's the case, then she's in serious danger. Takumi refuses to let any of the villagers get hurt, so he vows to bring her back safely and flies over the walls on Titan. Máni has just been cornered by 2 bush wolves, and there's no way she can outrun them, so she accepts her fate and resigns herself to dying here. But before the wolves could get to her, Takumi managed to swoop in and save her at the last second. He then gets her to safety and slashes the 2 wolves in half, so he tells Máni she can relax now. Máni is still worried and tells Takumi that there are a lot more wolves in the area, but Takumi tells her that shouldn't be a problem since his friends are taking care of it. And sure enough, Sofia and the others soon return to tell Takumi that they killed all the monsters in the area, so there's no need to worry. He was serious when he said he wouldn't let anything hurt the villagers living here. Máni now realizes she was horribly wrong about Takumi. He's nothing like the other nobles she has met, so she apologizes to him for her rude behavior before and asks if he would still be willing to hire her as his maid. Takumi smiles and says he would love to have her, and everyone else welcomes her to the team. After the night captain returns to Bolton, he informs Godwin of the work Takumi did, and Godwin is greatly pleased, but wonders if that city will really be good enough to serve as a wedge in their conflict with Sidonia. Over in Sidonia, the king receives a report that fortress with sturdy walls has been erected in the undeveloped land near Barcula. The king is surprised to hear that someone managed to build a fortress there so quickly, and he is even more surprised to learn that this was the work of the same alchemist that has been causing problems for Sidonia. The king is greatly irritated, but Elizabeth shows up and tells him that there's no need to worry because they will soon make Barcula regret going against them. The summoning circle they found has finally gathered enough mana, so they can now summon the heroes. As the summoning is carried out, an expansive wave of mana washes over the entire land, all the way up to the village where Takumi and the others are having lunch. They send some very unpleasant mana wash over them, so they all feel like something bad just happened. And this reminds Takumi of the fact that it has been 1 year since he arrived here. He remembers that Nolyn told him she sent him 1 year into the past from when he and the heroes were summoned, so that must mean the other heroes have arrived. And knowing what he does about Sidonia, this can't be good. The story continues. We see 3 months after the heroes were summoned, they had all reached A rank, so Nolyn anticipates that Sidonia will be making its move soon, and just as expected, Elizabeth tells the heroes that she has an announcement to make. She tells them that the time has finally come to introduce the world to its new heroes, so she's going to be taking them all over the continent so they can display their power. Akira and Yamato seem thrilled by the idea of going out into the world and being hailed as heroes, but Akane on the other hand, isn't so keen on it. However, she still plays along with the others and pretends that she's excited, so Elizabeth and the king won't realize that she's suspicious of them. Meanwhile, on Takumi's end, the village he built has now been named Wedgefort, and it is thriving as merchants and craftsmen move in to start their business. Meanwhile, in the forest outside the village, Sofia is busy slaying monsters, and after she cuts one in half, she's called out to buy Maple. She shows Sofia the monster she captured because she has never seen anything like it before, but Sofia immediately recognizes it as a bush lizard, and she's starting to grow worried because the monsters in this area keep growing stronger. She reports this to the others, so everyone offers to help her handle the exterminations, but Sofia tells them that won't be necessary since she can still handle it on her own. The only reason she's worried is because it's strange that the monsters suddenly started getting stronger all of a sudden. She believes that the monsters are being forced out of their natural habitats for some reason. And while she has no way to prove this, she thinks that mana fluctuation they felt 3 months ago might have something to do with it. After all, if it was strong enough to get their attention, then it must have had some sort of effect on the monsters in the area as well. Takumi recalls what Nolyn told him about the heroes being summoned, so he knows he needs to be careful, but at the same time, he doesn't know what to expect. Later that evening, the knight captain tells Takumi that Barak is requesting his return because he has a quest for him, so Takumi agrees to head back soon. But first, he asks the knight if anything interesting happened in Bolton while he was gone. The knight tells him that nothing has changed, but there's a rumor going around that 3 heroes have appeared in the Empire of Sidonia. After hearing the news, everyone gathers to talk about the implications of heroes being summoned in Sidonia. Since the others don't know the truth behind the heroes' summoning, Maria assumes Nolyn must have summoned the heroes to Sidonia in order to correct Sidonia's evil deeds, but Takumi knows that's not the case. Sidonia is still every bit as rotten as they were when they tried to kill him, so all he can hope is that the heroes who got summoned turn out to be good people. Unfortunately, that couldn't be further from reality because Akira and Yamato are certified scumbags now. As they are about to get into their carriage, Yamato asks if they are really going to bring that filthy demi-human with them. Lulu tries to apologize for offending him, but Yamato gets annoyed that she would even dare to speak to him. Akane stands up for Lulu and tells Yamato that she is her personal attendant, so he can't treat her that way, but Akira tells her demi-humans are nothing but slaves. However, since Akane is so fond of Lulu, he agrees to let her ride in the carriage with them. As the heroes are about to depart, Elizabeth and the king begin praying at Anat to help the heroes conquer their foes. And even if Anat wasn't real initially, she definitely is now. Once Takumi and the others return to Bolton, they ask Hans if he has any information about the heroes that were summoned in Sidonia. He tells them that the heroes are 2 boys and 1 girl, all with black hair, so Takumi assumes they must be Japanese just like him. Hans also mentions that the heroes are apparently on expedition to visit all the churches in Barcula, but that's just a cover story because their real goal is most likely to destroy the churches of Nolyn. Anyway, Hans tells Takumi that Papek has requested his party to escort him to the royal capital, and since it's a request from Papek, Takumi decides to accept. While everyone is getting ready for the escort mission, Máni asks Takumi if she can go on the mission with everyone else. Takumi doesn't think that's such a good idea since escort missions are dangerous, and Máni has no fighting capabilities so she might get hurt. Máni understands that, but staying in this mansion all alone while everyone else is out on their mission would make her feel very lonely. Maria and Sofia understand how Máni feels, and Máni pleads with him to reconsider. She says she can use earth magic, so she's not completely useless in a fight, and those puppy dog eyes are really harder for Takumi to ignore. So he ends up agreeing to let Máni join them on the escort mission, but only under the condition that she sticks close to Maria or Reva. Máni is delighted to hear that Takumi is willing to take her, but they'll still need to register her as an adventurer later. Meanwhile, the heroes are curved in making their way to Barcula, but Yamato and Akira are growing irritated by all the bumps since this carriage doesn't have any suspension. Akira heard that someone invented a carriage with suspension over in Barcula, so he wants one of those. And speaking of things he wants, he heard that there are also a ton of elves in Barcula, so asks Yamato if he wants to bring a few back home with them so they can have some fun. Yamato thinks that's a great idea, but the knight captain tells the 2 of them that Barcula has a law against taking slaves out of the country, but Akira and Yamato couldn't care less about laws. They are first-class adventurers who are well past level 30, so there shouldn't be anyone on this continent who can measure up to their combat power. Hearing the 2 of them talk like that makes Akane sick, but that's exactly why she has to do something before Akira and Yamato can cause any real harm. Right now they are heading for the royal capital of Barcula, and Akane gets the feeling that this may be her only chance to fix things. A few days pass and Takumi has completed his escort mission, so at the royal capital, the receptionist tells him that he, Sofia and Maria are all being promoted to A rank and Máni is being promoted to D rank. She asks them to present their guild cards so she can process their promotions, but all of a sudden there's a huge commotion at the back of the guild as the heroes have arrived, and they are making a huge scene already. Akira demands that everyone in the guild clear out so he can get to the front, and when one of the guild patrons tries to talk to him, he gut punches the guy for no reason. This will already be bad enough, but then Akira and Yamato spot Takumi and his beautiful slaves, and they think Takumi is just another inferior adventurer, so Akira demands that Takumi hand over the women immediately. Takumi obviously doesn't listen to him, and he's getting pretty annoyed by their rudeness. But he would still like to avoid fighting as much as possible, so he gives them a chance. He tells them to just leave him alone, but Akira has got too much self-importance for that, so he draws his sword and lunges at Takumi, the killing intent. Takumi effortlessly dodges while using his alchemy to destroy Akira's sword, and when Yamato tries to attack him, he just flips him onto the ground like a child. Akane is amazed that someone was able to defeat those 2 so easily, and Akira is absolutely devastated by the loss, especially since his sword was destroyed, so he tells Takumi he's going to regret this. In response, Takumi tells Akira that he's in no position to be making threats because for 1, he just got his ass handed to him, and 2, drawing your sword in the guild is a major offense, so he's going to get in a lot of trouble. Akira realizes Takumi is right, but he's still holding a grudge, so he swears he will get his revenge on Takumi eventually. Once those 2 leave, Akane runs up to Takumi to apologize for the behavior of her fellow heroes, but Takumi tells her there's no need to apologize since she didn't do anything wrong. She introduces herself to Takumi, and her intuition is telling her that Takumi is the person she's been looking for. But before she could say anything, Lulu comes over to tell Akane that it's time to leave. Takumi can tell that Akane had something she wanted to talk about, so he leans in and tells her that he will be waiting at the Lakeside Hotel tonight. Later that evening, Takumi tells the girls about his encounter with the heroes, but those 2 don't even deserve to be called heroes with the way they act. However, the girl that was with them seemed like a decent person, which is why Takumi told her to come meet him at this hotel. But now that he thinks about it, that might not have been such a good idea, because how exactly is Akane going to sneak away from her Sidonian escorts without being noticed? Evidently Akane did get notice, so now she's on the run from the Sidonian guards with Lulu so she can talk to Takumi. The guards are starting to close in on her, but all of a sudden Sofia appears and knocks out one of the guards, while Maple drags the other one away. Sofia later brings Akane to the hotel where she meets with Takumi. No one followed them here, so they won't have to worry about the Sidonian guards for a while, and Akane wants to get straight to the point, so she asks Takumi if he happens to be Japanese. Takumi tries to avoid the question since he can't risk the information being leaked to Sidonia, but Akane swears that she won't tell anyone. Takumi thinks Akane can be trusted, so he tells her that he's indeed Japanese, and the reason he is here is related to the heroes being summoned. Takumi's party members are confused because this is the first time they heard Takumi mention anything like this, but there's no point in keeping this a secret any longer, so he decides to just reveal the truth. Before he starts explaining, Takumi asks everyone to promise to keep this a secret no matter what, and after they all agree, he explains everything that happened before he was brought to this world. He expected them to think he was lying, but the girls actually don't find it hard to believe that Takumi is from the same world as the heroes and is acting on behalf of Nolyn. From everything Takumi has told them, it is pretty clear that Sidonia is the bad guy here, and the fact that they have the heroes poses a real problem. Akane asks if Takumi thinks Sidonia is planning to wage war on the other nations, but while that certainly is a possibility, Akira and Yamato are nowhere near strong enough to fight a war on their own. So it's much more likely that Sidonia plans to use the heroes to incite the masses into kickstarting a war. And even if they don't start a war, if the presence of the heroes spreads the influence of the Church of Divine Light, that would be a problem as well. Akane apologizes to Takumi for getting him involved in this mess, but Takumi tells her it's not her fault because they all got summoned here against their will because of Sidonia. But speaking of getting summoned, if Akira and Yamato are from Japan too, and there's no way they could have been such scumbags before arriving here, so Takumi asks Akane why they act like that. Akane doesn't know what caused it, but she does know that Akira and Yamato were kind people before they got here. But ever since they started training in Sidonia, their personalities changed drastically. Takumi finds that strange, so he asks Akane if they were ever given anything strange to eat, but Akane has no idea. She personally didn't trust Sidonia from the start, so she would always cast Purification Magic on her food before eating it. However, Akira and Yamato weren't as good with light magic, so it's possible they might have been drugged and brainwashed at some point. Knowing this, Akane kneels before Takumi and begs him to save her and Lulu because she can't afford to go back to Sidonia now. Takumi tells her to stop kneeling because she doesn't need to beg for his help. After all, he wouldn't want to abandon a fellow Japanese girl, so for now he suggests they head back to his mansion in Bolton. One quick carriage ride later, everyone arrives back in Bolton, and to raise Akane's spirits, Maria prepares some cream stew for her. Akane is astonished because she hasn't gotten to eat something like this in ages, and it makes her so happy that she starts crying. Meanwhile, over in Wedgefort, a guard station on the wall notices something strange going on in the forest, and upon closer inspection, he realizes it's a monster stampede, so he rushes to go sound the alarms. Meanwhile, back at Takumi's house, Akane and Lulu have gone to bed for the night, and Takumi is busy at his workshop with Reva. He plans to talk to the king about Akane and Lulu later, but for now they'll be safe in his mansion. And in the meantime, there's something he wants to do, so he asks all the girls to gather around. Once everyone is here, Takumi tells them that he's going to be dissolving everyone's slave contracts effective immediately. The girls are all heartbroken because they think Takumi is trying to abandon them again, but he tells them that's not what he meant. He's about to face more danger than ever before, and he knows the girls are willing to stick by his side through it all, so he doesn't want them to be bound by slave contracts anymore. He wants all of them to stand as equals to him, so they can truly call themselves a family. After Takumi dispels the slave contracts, he gets back to work in his workshop and finishes up 2 legendary swords he had been working on. But before he could even test the blades, he receives a notice from the guild telling him there's an emergency in Wedgefort, and when he reads the details, he is horrified by how bad it is. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.